Hello guys, welcome to Phoenix What If. So in this video, we will see, what if overpowered Naruto fell in love with Kūkaku Shiba in Bleach verse. If you enjoy these kinds of stories, don't forget to show us some love by hitting the like button and subscribing to the channel. Your support means the world to us. Now, let's start the story. Chapter 1. The Stranger in the Rūkongai. The landing, if one could call it that, was less an arrival and more a violent expulsion from reality. One moment, Naruto Uzumaki was adrift in a chaotic sea of screaming light and color. A maelstrom of raw energy born from a desperate, last-ditch jutsu clashing with an enemy's dimensional tear. The next, he was on his hands and knees in a dusty alley, the world spinning itself back into a semblance of order around him. The air tasted wrong. That was the first thing his senses, honed by years of living and breathing nature's energy, told him. It was thick, heavy, saturated with a fine, invisible grit that wasn't dust or sand. It was something else entirely, a form of energy so alien it made the hairs on his arms stand on end. He could feel it coating his skin, clinging to his lungs with every breath. It was a world humming with a frequency he'd never known. He pushed himself up, his body screaming in protest. The dimensional transit had scoured him raw, leaving his own VA. Saint reserves of chakra feeling distant and muted, like trying to shout through a wall of water. His orange and black jacket was torn, his trousers frayed at the cuffs, but he was whole. He leaned against a splintered wooden wall, taking a moment to just breathe, to let the vertigo subside. His six-path sage mode, usually a second skin of perception that let him feel the life, the intent, the very soul of the world around him, was struggling. The unfamiliar energy of this place was like static, making it difficult to get a clear reading. He could feel life, but it was different. Faint, ethereal, like echoes of what they once were. The alley opened onto a wider street, and Naruto moved towards the light, his steps slow and deliberate. The world that greeted him was one of muted tones and weary resignation. Ramshackle wooden buildings, some little more than shacks, crowded together, leaning on each other for support. The sky above was a strange, unchanging twilight, a canvas of perpetual dusk that offered neither the warmth of day nor the comfort of night. People shuffled along the dirt-packed street, their clothes simple and worn, their faces etched with a profound, bone-deep tiredness. He could feel their emotions, a dull soup of despair, fleeting moments of simple joy, and a pervasive, gnawing hunger. These weren't the vibrant, living people of Konoha. They felt faded, like souls. The thought struck him with an unnerving certainty. He was no longer in the elemental nations. This was something else, a world of the dead, an afterlife. The thought didn't frighten him as much as it disoriented him. He had won the war, saved his friends, brought peace. He was supposed to be home. Instead, he was adrift in purgatory. He walked, a silent observer in a world he didn't understand. He gathered snippets of conversation, the language remarkably similar to his own, a strange blessing he attributed to the sage's power that allowed him to comprehend all things. They spoke of rations, of water, of the districts closer to the white wall where life was supposedly better. They spoke of the Seraite, a name uttered with a mixture of awe and fear, and of the Shinigami, the Soul Reapers, who were its enforcers. It was in the heart of this district, a place they called Junrinin, the 78th district of the Rūkongai, that he saw it. A scene as old as time, one he'd witnessed and intervened in more times than he could count. A group of 5 burly, swaggering men had cornered a frail old man behind his small food cart. The cart was mostly empty, a few sad-looking rice balls and some dried persimmons all that remained. "Come on, old man," the leader sneered, a portly man with a nasty scar bisecting his left eyebrow. "Don't hold out on us. We know you made a good haul today. A little protection fee is all we ask." Quote. The old man trembled, his head bowed. "I have nothing left. Please, just let me go home." The leader laughed, a harsh, ugly sound. He backhanded the old vendor, sending the old man stumbling into his cart. The flimsy structure rattled, and the few remaining food items tumbled into the dirt. The crowd of onlookers, who had been watching from a safe distance, flinched collectively and took a step back. No one moved to help. Their fear was a palpable thing, a scent on the strange air. Naruto stopped walking. He watched as one of the thugs ground a rice ball into the dirt with his heel. He saw the single tear that traced a path through the grime on the old man's cheek. And in that moment, it didn't matter where he was, how tired he felt, or how little he understood this place. Some things were universal. Bullies preying on the weak was a line he would always stand against. He didn't announce his presence. He just moved, his footsteps silent on the packed earth. He came to a stop beside the food cart, his shadow falling over the leader. The thug, feeling the sudden drop in light, turned around, his sneer still fixed on his face. "What do you want? Get lost before you get hurt." Naruto's gaze was calm, his blue eyes holding a depth that seemed to swallow the dim light. "Leave him alone," he said, his voice quiet but carrying an unmistakable weight. For a moment, the 5 men just stared at him. At his strange, bright clothes, his sun-kissed hair, the whisker-like marks on his cheeks. He was an anomaly, and in a place where routine was survival, anomalies were threats. The leader broke the silence with a bark of laughter. "Hear that, boys? The pretty boy wants to be a hero." He cracked his knuckles. "We're going to enjoy teaching you a lesson." He threw a punch, a wide, telegraphed swing meant to intimidate more than injure. To the onlookers, it was a blur of motion. To Naruto, it was moving through molasses. He didn't even shift his feet. He simply raised his right hand, catching the man's meaty fist in his open palm. A collective gasp went through the small crowd. The thug's eyes widened in shock, his sneer dissolving into confusion. He tried to pull his fist back, but it was held fast, encased in a grip that felt like solid steel. There was no visible effort on Naruto's face, no strain in his muscles. He just held him. "I said," Naruto repeated, his voice still level, still quiet, "leave him alone." With a flick of his wrist, he tossed the man's arm aside. The leader stumbled back several feet, clutching his hand, his face a mask of pain and disbelief. "What the hell?" Another thug charged from the side, brandishing a rusty, chipped blade. Naruto sidestepped the clumsy lunge, the knife slicing through empty air. As the man stumbled past, Naruto tapped him lightly on the back of the neck with 2 fingers. The man's eyes rolled up into his head, and he collapsed in a boneless heap. Not dead, not even seriously injured. Just asleep. 3 were left. They looked from their unconscious comrade to Naruto, a primal fear beginning to dawn in their eyes. This wasn't a normal person. He hadn't even broken a sweat. There was no flourish, no battle cry. Just an economy of motion that was terrifying in its efficiency. One of them broke and ran. Then another. Only the leader remained, caught between his wounded pride and his survival instinct. Naruto took a single step towards him. He didn't raise his fists. He didn't adopt a fighting stance. He just looked at him, and for the first time, the leader truly saw the eyes of the man in front of him. They weren't just blue. They were ancient. They held the memory of mountains being carved, of oceans being born, of battles that had shaken the foundations of a world. The pressure emanating from him was immense, an invisible weight that crushed the air from the thug's lungs and made his very soul tremble. The leader scrambled backwards, falling over his own feet. He crab walked away, his bravado shattered, and then turned and fled, disappearing into the labyrinth of alleys without a backwards glance. The entire confrontation had lasted less than 30 seconds. Naruto turned his attention back to the old man, his presence receding back into a gentle calm. He knelt, picking up the scattered persimmons and the one remaining, slightly dusty rice ball. "Are you all right, old man?" The vendor stared at him, his eyes wide with a mixture of gratitude and terror. He nodded dumbly, accepting the food with a trembling hand. The crowd began to disperse, whispering amongst themselves, not wanting to be associated with such a display of power. Power drew attention, and in the Rukongai, attention was a dangerous thing. From the roof of a nearby tenement, THR.EE figures had watched the entire exchange with keen interest. "Well, damn," Kūkaku Shiba muttered, scratching at his scruffy chin. He was a large man, built like a battering ram, with wild dark hair. A boar skin sash over his simple kimono. Kid's got some moves. Didn't even look like he was trying. Beside him stood Koganehiko and Shiroganehiko, the twin guardians of the Shiba household. They were identical in their stoic expressions and their massive, muscular builds, distinguished only by the small, horn-like protrusions on their masks. It was his spiritual pressure, Master Ganju, Koganehiko said, his voice a low rumble. Or rather, the lack of it. He exerted almost none, Shiroganehiko added. His movements were entirely physical, yet they possessed a speed and precision far beyond what a normal soul should be capable of. He is not one of us. Ganju spat a sunflower seed shell over the edge of the roof. So what is he? Some kind of Shinigami in disguise. A new kind of hollow. Unlikely, Koganehiko replied. There was no Zanpakuto, no mask. The energy he does possess, it feels different. Dense. Like a sleeping sun. Ganju grunted. He didn't like mysteries, and he didn't like unknown variables showing up on their turf. The Shiba family, what was left of it, had enough trouble without some freak of nature drawing the Seraite's attention to their doorstep. So, what's the plan? We go down there and bust his head in. See what falls out. Unadvisable, Shiroganehiko stated flatly. The ease with which he dispatched those thugs suggests a level of power we should not test lightly. He showed restraint. That implies discipline and intelligence. So we just let him wander around. Ganju grumbled, though he knew they were right. He was impulsive, not stupid. We report to the Lady Kūkaku. Koganehiko concluded. She will decide how to proceed. Down below, Naruto helped the old man set his cart right. The vendor offered him the last rice ball, a meager payment for his help. Naruto smiled, a genuine, warm expression that momentarily lit up the gloomy street, and gently refused. He had his own problems to worry about. First on the list, figure out where the hell he was, and how to get back. He turned to leave, but his path was blocked. The three men from the roof had appeared before him as if from nowhere. The big one in the middle, the one with the boar skin, had his arms crossed. A challenging look on his face. Not so fast, pal, Ganju said, his voice a low growl. That was quite a show back there. You're not from around here, are you? Naruto met his gaze, his senses on high alert. He could feel the power coming off these three. It was more refined, more controlled than the thugs, but it was the same fundamental type of energy that saturated the air. I'm just passing through, Naruto said, his tone even. I'm not looking for any trouble. Ganju scoffed. People like you are trouble magnets. You can't just show up in Junrinin, beat down some local muscle, and expect to just pass through. Who are you? What do you want? Naruto's eyes flickered between the three of them. The loud one was the leader, but the two silent giants flanking him were the real threats. He could feel the coiled strength within them. He was still depleted from his journey. A protracted fight was the last thing he needed. My name is Naruto, and what I want is to find my way home. His answer was honest, simple, and utterly unbelievable to the men standing before him. Naruto, huh, Ganju said, testing the name on his tongue. Funny name. And home is a long way from the Rukongai for anyone who ends up here. He took a step forward, trying to use his size to intimidate. I think you'd better come with us. Our boss wants to have a word with you. Naruto's stance didn't change, but an almost imperceptible tension entered his frame. And if I refuse? It was Koganehiko who answered, his voice devoid of emotion. We would prefer you didn't. Our master does not like to be kept waiting. There was no overt threat in the words, but the implication was clear. Naruto weighed his options. He was in a foreign land, exhausted, and completely alone. These men were part of an established group. A local power. Fighting them would gain him nothing but more enemies. Going with them, however, that could lead to answers. At the very least, it would lead to someone in charge. He let out a slow breath, the tension leaving his shoulders. All right, he said, lead the way. Ganju looked slightly surprised by his easy compliance but quickly masked it with a triumphant smirk. Good choice. Don't try anything funny. He turned and began to walk, the two giants falling in behind Naruto, a silent, intimidating escort. They led him away from the relative bustle of the 78th district. Heading further out into the periphery, the landscape grew increasingly desolate. The crowded shacks gave way to sparse, rocky terrain dotted with withered trees. The ground was gray and dusty, and the perpetual twilight seemed to deepen, casting long, distorted shadows. The silence stretched, broken only by the crunch of their footsteps on the gravelly earth. Naruto used the time to observe, to listen. He could feel the energy of this world more clearly now, away from the dense press of souls. He could feel the massive, walled city they were walking away from, the Seraite. He presumed, a fortress of immense spiritual power that felt like a coiled dragon. And ahead of them, he could feel another concentration of power, smaller but no less potent. It was sharp, explosive, and crackled with a barely contained energy that reminded him of a thunderstorm. "So, who's this, master, of yours?" Naruto asked, breaking the silence. Ganju glanced over his shoulder. "You'll meet her soon enough. Just a word of advice. Be respectful. Lady Kūkaku isn't known for her patience." The name, Shiba, from their earlier conversation clicked in his mind. Kūkaku Shiba, head of the Shiba clan. A noble family. From the sound of it, though their residence this far out in the Rukongai suggested they weren't exactly in favor. The journey continued for another 20 minutes until a strange structure came into view. Rising from the desolate landscape like a defiant fist. It was a house, but unlike any he had ever seen. It was a cylindrical building with a traditional tiled roof. But jutting from its sides were two colossal, disembodied arms, their fists clenched towards the sky. The entire compound was surrounded by a simple wooden fence, and a banner with the Shiba clan crest. A stylized swirling vortex, flapped lazily in the non-existent wind. The place hummed with the crackling energy he had sensed. It was the source. As they approached the gate, Ganju straightened up, his boisterous attitude replaced by a more subdued respect. Koganehiko and Shiroganehiko moved to stand on either side of the entrance, their roles as guardians immediately apparent. "Lady Kūkaku," Ganju called out, "we're back, and we brought that stranger we told you about." There was a moment of silence. Then, a voice from within, clear and sharp as a whip crack, cut through the air. "Well, don't just stand there gawking. Bring him in." Ganju motioned for Naruto to follow and led him into the courtyard. The front of the house slid open with a smooth rumble, revealing a darkened interior. A figure was silhouetted in the doorway, smoke curling around her form. As she stepped out into the twilight, Naruto got his first proper look at the master of the Shiba clan. She was a woman of striking presence. Her dark hair was tied up in an intricate knot, held in place by elegant pins. She wore a sarashi that left her toned midriff and arms bare, revealing intricate tattoos. A flowing white cape was draped over her shoulders, and one of her arms, he noted, was a complex prosthetic, a masterpiece of wood and metal. She held a long, slender smoking pipe in her flesh and blood hand, and her eyes, sharp, intelligent, and brimming with a fiery confidence, swept over him, taking in every detail of his appearance. She wasn't just assessing him as a threat, she was dissecting him with a piercing, unapologetic curiosity. The explosive, thunderstorm-like energy he had sensed emanated directly from her. She took a slow drag from her pipe, exhaling a plume of smoke that swirled around her face. Her gaze was intense, unwavering, holding none of the fear or awe he had seen in the eyes of others today. It held only a challenge. "So," Kūkaku Shiba said, her voice a low, husky purr that held an undercurrent of steel. "You're the one who made the street rats piss themselves without breaking a sweat." A dangerous, intrigued grin spread across her lips. "Are you lost, or just looking for trouble?" Naruto met her gaze, and for the first time since he'd been violently ripped from his own world, he felt a spark of something other than confusion and exhaustion. In her defiant posture, in her challenging eyes, in the sheer force of her personality, he recognized a kindred spirit. Someone who, like him, lived by their own rules and carved their own path. A slow, genuine smile touched his lips. Maybe a little of both. Chapter 1 End. Chapter 2. A sky of exploding flowers. Kūkaku's grin widened, a flash of white in the perpetual dusk. It was a dangerous, knowing expression, the kind worn by someone who regularly played with explosives and enjoyed it. She took another long, thoughtful drag from her pipe, the cherry glowing a fierce orange, and looked Naruto up and down again. He didn't flinch or look away, simply met her gaze with a placid curiosity that seemed to intrigue her even more. Most people, when faced with the full force of her personality, either puffed up their chests in a show of bravado or shrank away in intimidation. This man did neither. He was just there. A calm, immovable object that her force of will seemed to wash over without effect. A little of both, huh? She mused, her voice a low rumble. Honest, at least. I like that. She gestured with her pipe towards the interior of her strange home. Get inside. Ganju, you idiot, get our guest something to drink. And the rest of you, make sure no one else comes sniffing around. The last thing I need is more of Junrinen's riff-raff thinking this is a public park. Ganju, who had been watching the exchange with a bewildered expression, snapped to attention. Right, Lady Kūkaku. He nudged Naruto forward, a little rougher than necessary, before leading him into the surprisingly spacious main room of the cylindrical house. The interior was a chaotic but organized mess. Diagrams and blueprints covered the walls, depicting complex spherical designs filled with what looked like arcane formulas. Tools of every shape and size lay on workbenches, alongside half-finished metal casings and piles of brightly colored powders. The entire place smelled of sulfur, strange herbs, and ozone. It was the workshop of a master craftsman, an artist whose medium was pure, unadulterated energy. Naruto's eyes scanned the room, absorbing the details. This was Kido, he realized. The Soul Reaper equivalent of Jutsu. But this application was different. It wasn't for combat, not directly. It was for creation, for art. It was a level of control and precision that spoke volumes about the woman who now entered the room behind him. Her prosthetic arm clicking softly on the wooden floor. Sake, Kūkaku offered, gesturing to a large gourd Ganju had placed on a low table. Water is fine, Naruto replied. His system was still trying to recalibrate, and he needed a clear head. She raised an eyebrow but nodded to Ganju, who grumbled but fetched a cup of water. Kūkaku poured herself a generous serving of sake and settled onto a large cushion, crossing her legs. She watched him, her sharp eyes missing nothing as he took the cup and drank, his movements economical and graceful. All right, Naruto with the funny name, she began, setting her cup down with a soft click. Let's cut the crap. You're not a plus. You're not a Shinigami. You're definitely not a Quincy, not with that energy signature. And you're way too put together to be a hollow. So, what are you? Quote. He finished his water and set the cup down. It's a long story. I've got time, she countered, taking a sip of her sake. And given that you're currently on my property, under my protection, I'd say you owe me at least the short version. He considered her. Lying was an option, but his gut told him it would be a mistake. She was too perceptive. Obfuscating would just breed mistrust. The truth, as unbelievable as it was his only real currency here. I'm from another world, he said, the words feeling ridiculous even as he spoke them. Ganju, who was lurking by the door, let out a snort of derisive laughter. Another world. You hit your head on the way down, pal. Kūkaku silenced him with a single, sharp glare. Her gaze remained fixed on Naruto, searching his face for any hint of deception. She found none, only a weary sincerity. Another world, she repeated, her voice neutral. You expect me to believe that? I don't expect you to believe anything, Naruto said calmly. But it's the truth. Where I'm from, we use a different kind of energy. We call it chakra. I was in a fight. A big one. Something went wrong, and I ended up here. He held up his hand, palm open. This place, the air itself is filled with an energy I've never felt. It's making it hard for me to connect with my own. Kūkaku's eyes narrowed, a flicker of genuine academic curiosity now mixing with her suspicion. She leaned forward, her gaze dropping to his open palm. You're talking about Reishi, the spiritual particles that compose everything in the Soul Society. You're saying you can't use it. I can feel it, Naruto clarified. It's everywhere, but it's like trying to breathe water. My body isn't made for it. My chakra feels distant, muted. This, finally, seemed to land with her. The idea of an energy source completely separate from their own was a concept so foreign it was more plausible than him being some secret weapon from a known faction. It expressed the raw physical power he'd displayed without any corresponding spiritual pressure. He wasn't using their rules. He was playing a different game entirely. She leaned back, a slow, dangerous smile returning to her face. A different kind of energy, you say? How fascinating. She stood up, a new energy crackling around her. All right, Mr. Otherworldly, you need my protection, and I need a favor. I'm in the middle of a big project. My masterpiece. But my usual crew is short-handed, and Ganju is about as delicate as a charging boar. Ganju sputtered a protest from the doorway, which she ignored. I want to see this chakra of yours, she continued, her eyes gleaming with a manic creative fire. I want to see what it can do. You help me, and I'll give you a place to stay, food in your belly. And my word that no one from the Seraite will come knocking on your door without going through me first. What do you say? Naruto looked at the blueprints on the wall, at the half-finished casings. What kind of project? Kūkaku's grin was blinding. The greatest firework this world has ever seen. A Reikaku-hu, a spirit crane phoenix. It's for the Rukongai Summer Festival in 2 days. A little tradition of mine. A way to give those poor souls something beautiful to look at, and a way to remind the stuffy bastards in the Seraite that the Shiba clan is still here. A firework. All this for a firework. Naruto couldn't help but let out a small laugh. After wars and monsters, after battles that decided the fate of the world, his first challenge in this new reality was pyrotechnics. It was absurd. It was perfect. All right, Kūkaku Shiba, he said, rising to his feet. You've got a deal. Show me what you need me to do. Her test was not one of strength, but of control. Kūkaku led him to a large, open area behind the house, a dusty training ground littered with scorch marks and the remnants of past experiments. In the center sat a large, perfectly spherical metal shell, about the size of a beach ball. It was open, its 2 halves resting beside a complex array of smaller spheres and packets. This, she said, tapping the shell with her prosthetic hand, is the casing for the primary burst. My fireworks aren't just simple gunpowder, pretty boy. They're a form of Kido. Each of these smaller packets, the stars, has to be infused with a precise amount of spiritual energy. Too little, and it's a dud. Too much, and the whole thing blows up in our faces. She picked up one of the small, silk-wrapped packets. I need you to channel your energy into this. I want to see how it reacts with my Kido base. Don't try to match my output. Just give me a steady, controlled stream. Let me feel what this chakra of yours is all about. Naruto took the packet. It felt inert in his hand. He closed his eyes, shutting out the alien world around him and reaching inward. His connection to his chakra was still there, a vast, churning ocean of power, but it was muffled, the link stretched thin across dimensions. Kurama was silent, likely conserving his own energy as he tried to make sense of their new environment. Naruto focused, drawing on his own reserves, pulling a thin, steady stream of his familiar blue energy down his arm and into his palm. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, Kūkaku, who had her hand resting lightly on his shoulder to feel the flow, gasped. Incredible, she breathed, her eyes wide. It's so dense. Reishi is like a fine mist. This is like liquid gold. It's warm. It feels alive. Naruto channeled the chakra into the packet. The silk began to glow with a soft, azure light. He could feel the spiritual particles within the packet reacting to his chakra, a strange resonance building between the 2 energies. It wasn't a smooth integration. It was like trying to mix oil and water. But his control, honed by years of creating Rasengans and maintaining Sage Mode, was absolute. He forced the energies to coexist, wrapping his chakra around the reishi, compressing it, stabilizing it. Okay, he said, opening his eyes. I think that's it. The packet in his hand was now humming with a gentle, pulsing blue light. Kūkaku took it from him, her expression one of intense concentration. She handled it like a surgeon handling a vital organ. She brought it close to her face, examining it, feeling its output. A slow, impressed smile spread across her face. You're a natural, she said, her voice holding a note of genuine awe. The energy is stable, more stable, even, than my own infusions. The way you wrapped your power around the core, you didn't just force it in. You harmonized with it. You have the control of a Kido master, but with an energy I've never seen before. She tossed the packet back to him. All right, we have about 300 more of those to do. Let's get to work. The next 2 days were a blur of focused effort. They worked side by side in her workshop, a comfortable silence often stretching between them, punctuated by Her sharp instructions and his quiet questions. He learned the rhythm of her work, the fierce pride she took in her craft. This wasn't just a hobby for her, it was her connection to her family, her art, her defiance. He, in turn, was a revelation to her. He learned quickly, his intuitive understanding of energy transcending the differences between chakra and reishi. He didn't just follow her instructions, he started to anticipate them, suggesting minor modifications to the keto formulas based on how his chakra interacted with them. He was a prodigy, a savant of energy manipulation, and he was using his world-breaking power to help her pack colored powder into silk bags. The absurdity was not lost on her, and she found it endlessly fascinating. During their breaks, they talked. She told him of the Shiba clan, once one of the 5 great noble houses, now disgraced and living in exile because of her brother, Kūkaku Shiba, and his tragic fate. She spoke of her nephew, Ichigo, with a mixture of pride and frustration. She spoke of the stuffy, arrogant nobles in the Seraite who looked down on her, not just for her family's past, but for her choice to live freely, unbound by their suffocating traditions. Naruto, in turn, spoke of his own life, painting in broad strokes. He told her of Konoha, of being an outcast, a Jinchuriki shunned by his village. He spoke of his dream to become Hokage, to be acknowledged, and the long, hard road he'd walked to achieve it. He didn't mention the war, the godlike beings, or the true scale of his power. He didn't need to. She saw the truth of it in the quiet weight he carried. The old sadness that sometimes flickered in his eyes. They were 2 sides of the same coin. 2 powerful individuals who had been ostracized by the very worlds they sought to protect. Who had chosen to live by their own code. A bond formed between them in the heat of the workshop, forged in sulfur and shared stories. He found himself drawn to her fiery spirit, her sharp wit, her unapologetic strength. She, in turn, was captivated by his quiet confidence, the gentle kindness that lay beneath his immense power, and the way his blue eyes seemed to see right through the tough exterior she showed the world. On the evening of the festival, they stood on a high, rocky plateau overlooking the 78th district. The massive spherical firework, their joint creation, sat on a wooden launch stand, connected by a long fuse. Below, the streets of Junrinen were more alive than Naruto had ever seen them. Lanterns had been hung from the shabby buildings, casting a warm, gentle glow. Souls, for once, were smiling, their faces filled with anticipation. Nervous, Kūkaku asked, nudging him with her elbow. About a firework, Naruto smirked. After everything I've seen, not a chance. Don't get cocky, she shot back, though her eyes were dancing with excitement. This is the moment of truth. Either we give them the show of a lifetime, or this thing blows us halfway to the Seraite. She held out a small, smoldering stick of incense. The honors are all yours. He took the stick, its tip glowing red. He looked at her, at the way the twilight caught the lines of her face, the fierce pride in her eyes. He had been adrift, lost, and this woman, this loud, brilliant, explosive woman, had given him a temporary anchor. He wanted to give her something in return. He knelt by the fuse. But instead of just lighting it, he closed his eyes and focused. He reached for his chakra, but this time, he pulled on a different strand. A sliver of the brilliant, chaotic, overwhelming orange energy that belonged to his oldest friend and partner. He let a tiny, almost infinitesimal amount of Kurama's chakra leak out, shaping it not into a weapon, but into a signature. An artist's mark. He touched the incense to the fuse. It hissed to life, a sputtering line of fire racing towards the giant sphere. Get back, Kūkaku yelled, pulling him behind a large boulder that served as their blast shield. The fuse disappeared into the base of the firework. For a heart-stopping second, nothing happened. Then, with a deep, resonant FWOOM, the sphere shot into the sky, a streak of brilliant white against the deepening gloom. It climbed higher and higher, a silent, rising star. Down below, thousands of faces turned upward. And then it exploded. It was not a single, violent burst. It was a symphony of light and color. The initial break was a perfect, shimmering sphere of gold, so bright it momentarily turned the twilight to day. From this golden sun, hundreds of blue stars shot outwards, each one leaving a trail of crackling, azure light. But they didn't just fade. As they reached their apex, Each blue star burst again, this time into a shower of silver and crimson, creating a cascading waterfall effect that seemed to fill the entire sky. The crowd below gasped, a collective sound of pure wonder. Not bad, Kūkaku said, her voice filled with smug satisfaction. The color saturation is perfect. Your chakra really gives it an extra kick. Wait for it, Naruto said, his eyes still fixed on the sky. The last of the crimson and silver sparks began to fade, and for a moment, the show seemed to be over. But then, in the center of where the initial explosion had happened, a new light began to form. The residual energy, the unique signature he had infused into the core, was coalescing. It swirled, it gathered, it took shape. 9 massive, sweeping tails of brilliant orange fire unfurled across the sky, crackling with untamed energy. They writhed and danced, and then, at their center, the shape of a colossal, snarling fox's head materialized, its eyes burning with a primal, crimson light. It was Kurama, painted in fire across the heavens. The image was terrifying, majestic, and utterly alien. It let out a silent, roaring challenge to the world, a declaration of presence that shook the very souls of those who witnessed it. Down below, the awe of the crowd turned to stunned, fearful silence. This was no mere firework. This was a display of power unlike anything they had ever conceived. Kūkaku stared, her mouth agape, the smoldering pipe forgotten in her hand. She turned to look at Naruto, her eyes wide with 1,000 questions. He was just watching the sky, a small, sad smile on his face. He had shared a piece of his soul with her, with this world. The magnificent, terrifying image of the 9-tailed fox hung in the sky for a long, breathless minute before it finally, slowly, dissipated into a shower of fading orange embers. The festival was over. As the last spark died, Kūkaku finally found her voice. Naruto, what in the name of the Soul King was that? Before he could answer, they both felt it. Several sharp, distinct spiritual pressures appearing at the edge of the plateau. They were fast, disciplined, and heading directly for them. Naruto and Kūkaku turned as a group of black-robed figures landed silently on the rocks a few dozen yards away. They all wore the traditional Shinigami Shihakusho, their hands resting on the hilts of the Zanpakuto at their waists. The man at their lead was tall and lanky, with fiery red hair tied in a high ponytail and strange tattoos around his eyes. A lieutenant's badge was tied to his arm. The red-haired Shinigami, Renji Aburai, surveyed the scene, the two figures standing beside the massive, smoking launch platform, the lingering, impossibly dense spiritual energy in the air. His eyes narrowed, settling on Naruto, then on the infamous Kūkaku Shiba. Kūkaku Shiba, Renji called out, his voice sharp and official. By order of the Gote 13, we are here to investigate an unsanctioned and dangerously large release of spiritual energy. His gaze hardened. You have a lot of explaining to do. And you, he said, his eyes locking onto Naruto, are coming with us. Kūkaku stepped forward, placing herself slightly in front of Naruto. She picked up her pipe, tapping out the ash against a rock. Her playful, creative mood had vanished, replaced by a cold, protective fury. My fireworks are none of the Gote 13's damn business, Lieutenant Aburai, she snarled, her voice dripping with contempt. And as for my guest, she glanced back at Naruto, a defiant smirk playing on her lips, he's not going anywhere. Naruto stood beside her, a silent pillar of calm. He didn't look at the Shinigami. He looked at Kūkaku, at the unwavering line of her back as she stood between him and the rest of the world. In 2 days, she had become his first, and only, ally. And he would not let her face this alone. The standoff was set, the lines drawn on a dusty plateau under a sky that still smelled of ozone and otherworldly fire. Chapter 2 End. Chapter 3. The Weight of a Name. Renji Aburai's stance was a study in coiled aggression. He was a lieutenant, a position earned through blood and battle, and he was not accustomed to being so flagrantly dismissed, especially not by a disgraced noble and some orange-clad oddity. The spiritual energy in the air was still thick with the ghost of that monstrous fox, an oppressive, alien presence that made the back of his neck prickle. I'm not asking, Kūkaku, Renji snapped, his hand tightening on the hilt of his Zanpakuto. This is an order. Your guest is a person of interest. His spiritual pressure is unlike anything ever recorded. He will come with us for questioning, peacefully or otherwise. Kūkaku let out a short, harsh laugh. Or otherwise, are you threatening me on my own land, you red-haired mutt? You and what army? She took a deliberate step forward. Her own spiritual pressure flaring to life. A wild, crackling energy that smelled of ozone and gunpowder. You Seraite lapdogs have no jurisdiction here. Now get the hell off my property before I launch you back to your barracks. The Shinigami behind Renji shifted nervously. They knew of Kūkaku Shiba. They knew her reputation as a Kido master and an unpredictable eccentric. But the real UNKN. Own was the blonde man standing silently behind her. He hadn't moved a muscle, hadn't flared his energy, yet he was the epicenter of the unease they all felt. He was a void in their senses, a blank spot. See that their spiritual awareness couldn't properly read, yet the sheer scale of the power they'd just witnessed was undeniable. Renji, however, was not one to back down from a challenge. Pride was a core component of his being. Fine, he growled, drawing his blade. The sword was a standard katana, but the air around it seemed to vibrate with anticipation. Have it your way, roar, Zabumaru, with a surge of spiritual pressure. The blade transformed. It segmented, the pieces connected by a flexible metallic cord, whipping through the air like a bladed serpent. It shot forward, not aiming for a kill, but to ensnare, to disable. It moved with blinding speed, aimed directly at Naruto. Kūkaku started to move, a Kido incantation already on her lips, but she was too slow. From her perspective, Zabumaru was a blur. From Naruto's, it was a lazy crawl. He took a single, casual step, moving to stand in front of Kūkaku. He didn't draw a weapon. He didn't gather energy for a jutsu. He simply raised his left hand. His fingers slightly curled, and waited. The fanged head of Zabumaru struck his open palm with a sharp clang of metal on something far harder than flesh. And stopped. The air went still. The whistling sound of the blade cutting through the night was silenced. The forward momentum of the Shikai, powered by a lieutenant's full strength, was completely negated. Naruto hadn't even braced himself. His feet hadn't shifted in the gravel. He just caught it. Renji's jaw went slack. His eyes widened in disbelief. He was connected to Zabumaru. He could feel it. He felt his weapon strike. An object with the unyielding density of a mountain. There was no give, no tremor, just an absolute, immovable stop. He pulled, trying to retract his Zanpakuto, but it wouldn't budge. The blonde man's grip was casual, almost dismissive. Yet it held the power of his Shikai with insulting ease. That's enough, Naruto said. His voice was still calm, but it had an edge to it now, a low vibration that seemed to resonate in the very bones of everyone present. For the first time, he let a sliver of his own energy, his chakra, shaped by his will, push outward. It wasn't like a Shinigami's spiritual pressure, a crushing weight of presence. It was something else. It was the feeling of standing at the base of a waterfall, the roar of 1,000 tons of water shaking the earth. It was the feeling of the air before a lightning strike. Thick and electric. It was immense, ancient, and utterly, terrifyingly, natural. The lower-ranked Shinigami stumbled back, their hands flying to their swords, their faces pale. Renji felt a cold sweat break out on his brow. The pressure wasn't directed at him like an attack, it was simply unveiled. A curtain had been pulled back, and he was getting a glimpse of the sun hiding behind it. Naruto tightened his grip slightly. A spiderweb of fine cracks appeared on the metal fangs of Zabumaru's head. Call it off, Naruto said, his blue eyes locking onto Renji's. Or I'll break it. The threat was delivered with no malice, just a simple statement of fact. That's what made it so terrifying. Renji, swallowing the lump of pride in his throat, released his Shikai. The segmented blade went slack, and with a flick of his wrist, Naruto tossed it back, sending it skittering across the rocks to Renji's feet. It reverted to its sealed katana form as Renji hastily sheathed it. The standoff was over. The power dynamic had been irrevocably established. Renji's squad was no threat here. We will report this, Renji said, his voice tight. He gathered his subordinates with a sharp look. He had been humiliated, but he was also a soldier who knew when he was outgunned. This was a matter for the captains. Without another word, they were gone, disappearing in a blur of shunpo. A hasty and undignified retreat. Silence descended on the plateau once more, broken only by the quiet hiss of the cooling launch platform. Kūkaku let out a long, slow breath she hadn't realized she was holding. She turned to Naruto, her usual fiery bravado replaced by a look of stunned appraisal. "You know," she said, her voice a little hoarse, "when I offered you my protection, I didn't think it would be the other way around." Quote. Naruto just shrugged, the immense pressure around him vanishing as if it had never been there. "You gave me a place to stay. I don't like it when people threaten my friends." The word hung in the air between them. Friends. It had only been 2 days, but in that short time, a foxhole camaraderie had been built. He had seen her passion, her defiance. She had seen his quiet strength, his hidden pain. The word felt right. A slow smile spread across Kūkaku's face, a genuine one this time, free of her usual sardonic edge. "Yeah, well, you're more useful than you look, pretty boy." She clapped him on the shoulder with her prosthetic hand, the sound a solid thud. "But don't think this is over. That idiot lieutenant is going to run straight to his captain. And knowing who his captain is, things are about to get a lot more complicated." "Who is his captain?" Naruto asked. "Byakuya Kuchiki," she said, and the name came out like a curse. "Head of the Kuchiki clan. The poster boy for every stuck-up, tradition-choked, arrogant noble in the Seraite. He lives and breathes the law, and we just broke about a dozen of his precious rules." She sighed, running a hand through her hair. "He'll be here soon. He won't send another squad. He'll come himself." She was right. Less than an hour later, the very atmosphere of the Rukongai seemed to change. It was a subtle shift at first, a stillness that fell over the desolate landscape. The faint, distant chatter of the souls in the 78th district died away. Then came the pressure. It was nothing like Naruto's. His was an overwhelming force of nature. This was a finely crafted weapon. It was cold, precise, and utterly suffocating, a blanket of icy authority that demanded submission. It was the pressure of a man who had never known what it meant to have his will questioned. Naruto and Kūkaku stood in the courtyard before her house, waiting. They both felt him long before he arrived. He didn't appear with the hurried flash of a normal shunpo. He simply materialized. One moment the space before them was empty, the next, Byakuya Kuchiki was there. He stood perfectly still, clad in the captain's haori, his hands tucked into his sleeves. His kenseiken and silver-white teko, symbols of his noble status, seemed to absorb the dim light. His face was a mask of aristocratic indifference, his gray eyes cold and analytical. He surveyed the scene, the scorch-marked plateau in the distance, Kūkaku's unorthodox home, Kūkaku herself, and finally, the strange man standing beside her. His gaze lingered on Naruto, and for a fraction of a second, Naruto saw a flicker of something in those cold eyes. Not surprise, not fear, but the sharp, focused interest of a predator identifying a truly unknown species. "Kūkaku Shiba," Byakuya began. His voice as cold and emotionless as his expression. "Your unsanctioned use of high-yield Kido has caused a significant disturbance. Your blatant disregard for the laws of the Seraite is, as usual, noted." His gaze shifted fully to Naruto. "And you, the Ryoka, my lieutenant's report was intriguing. You possess an energy signature unknown to our archives, and power sufficient to disable a lieutenant's Shikai with no apparent effort. By the authority of the Gote 13, you will accompany me back to the Seraite for interrogation." It wasn't a request. It was a statement of fact. A declaration of how the world was meant to operate. Kūkaku stepped forward, her body language radiating defiance. "He's under the protection of the Shiba clan, Kuchiki. You may be the head of your precious family, but you're not the king of the Soul Society. You have no authority over my guests." Byakuya's eyes narrowed almost imperceptibly. The Shiba clan is a shadow of its former self. Its protection is meaningless. Do not interfere. This does not concern you. The hell it doesn't, she spat. He's with me. You want him, you go through me. Byakuya let out a sigh that was pure theater. A display of weary patience for the petulant child before him. Your sentiment is as predictable as it is foolish. He looked back at Naruto. I will ask you one last time. Come with me peacefully. Naruto had been silent, observing the exchange. He saw the history between them, the clash of two opposing philosophies. The free, passionate outcast versus the cold, rigid enforcer of the system. He knew whose side he was on. "We're not going," Naruto said, his voice cutting through the tension. Simple. Final. A flicker of annoyance, the first genuine emotion Byakuya had shown, crossed the captain's face. "You have no say in the matter. You are an intruder in our world. You will submit to its laws." He raised his hand, palm forward. Bakudo number 61, Raikujokuro. 6 wide beams of yell. Low light materialized in the air and shot towards Naruto, intending to slam into his midsection and immobilize him completely. It was a high-level binding spell, cast without incantation, a testament to Byakuya's skill. The beams struck Naruto, and dissipated. They splashed against his body like water against stone, vanishing into nothing. He hadn't put up a barrier. He hadn't countered with his own energy. His very existence, his dense, alien chakra, seemed to act as a nullification field for their spirit-based arts. Byakuya's cold composure finally cracked. His eyes widened in genuine shock. That was impossible. No one, not even Captain Commander Yamamoto, could simply ignore a high-level Bakudo spell. "What are you?" Byakuya whispered, his mind racing through every possibility and finding none. Naruto's expression was unreadable. "I'm the guy telling you to turn around and leave my friend alone." For Byakuya Kuchiki, this was the ultimate insult. Not just the defiance, but the complete and utter invalidation of his power, his station, his entire worldview. The laws of spiritual energy were being broken before his very eyes. And when the law is broken, there is only one response. He drew his Zanpakuto, holding it vertically before him. The blade gleamed in the twilight. "You have forced my hand, Ryoka." His voice dropped, taking on a deadly resonance. "You will learn the difference between your unrefined power and the elegance of a Shinigami's blade." Scatter. Senbon Sakura. The blade dissolved. In its place, 1,000 tiny, shimmering blades erupted, catching the light like a swirling cloud of cherry blossom petals. The air filled with a soft, beautiful, and utterly lethal hum. With a flick of Byakuya's wrist, the storm of microscopic blades surged forward. A shimmering pink wave of death that shredded everything in its path. Kūkaku's eyes widened. She knew this attack. There was no blocking it, no dodging it. It was an omnipresent assault. But Naruto didn't try to block or dodge. He simply raised his right hand. A swirl of wind, visible and clear, began to form in his palm. It wasn't violent or destructive. It was controlled, precise. It expanded rapidly, not into a sphere, but into a swirling dome of air that enveloped both him and Kūkaku. The petals of Senbon Sakura crashed against the dome. But they did not shred it. They were caught. The wind was not a solid wall, but a perfectly calibrated vortex. Each of the million tiny blades was caught in the current, their velocity stolen, their direction altered. They were swept up, spinning harmlessly within the wind shield. Their beautiful, deadly purpose utterly neutralized. It was like watching a blizzard trying to break through a gentle whirlwind. From his position outside the dome, Byakuya could only stare in stunned disbelief. He was the master of Senbon Sakura. He controlled every single petal. Yet, he could feel his connection to them being redirected. He was still in control, but his control was rendered meaningless. The Ryoka wasn't overpowering his Shikai, he was making it dance to his tune. With a final, gentle push, Naruto's wind dome expanded outward, sending the cloud of petals scattering back towards Byakuya, where they fell to the ground around him like a rain of harmless steel flowers. Silence. Utter, profound silence. Byakuya stood amidst his defeated Shikai, his mind unable to process what had just happened. This wasn't Kido. It wasn't Raryoku. It was a fundamental force of nature, wielded with a control that bordered on the divine. Before anyone could speak, before the confrontation could escalate to an even more terrifying level, a sound cut through the night. A scream, high-pitched and filled with terror. It came from the direction of the 78th district. It was followed by another, and another. Naruto's head snapped in the direction of the sounds. His sensory abilities, though muffled, could feel it clearly. Jagged, hungry presences, multiple. Their energy was grotesque, a swirling mess of pain and hunger. Hollows, a lot of them. They weren't just wandering in, this was an organized attack. Kūkaku felt it too. Damn it, she swore, her attendee. on immediately shifting from the captain before her to the souls she informally protected. A Manos-class spiritual pressure. No, 3 of them. And dozens of smaller ones. They'll be slaughtered. In that instant, the standoff with Byakuya became utterly irrelevant. It was a squabble, a pissing contest in the face of real, immediate danger to innocent lives. Naruto looked at Kūkaku and saw the same urgency. The same priority reflected in her eyes. Their decision was made without a single word needing to be spoken. Naruto turned his gaze back to Byakuya. The captain was still processing his defeat. But his head had also turned towards the sounds of the attack. "There are people who need help," Naruto said, his voice flat and devoid of its earlier patience. "You can stand here and try to salvage your pride. Or you can do the job you're supposed to be doing and protect those souls. It's your choice." He didn't wait for an answer. Kūkaku was already running towards a shed on the side of her property. "Ganju," she yelled. "Get the cannon ready." "What cannon?" Naruto asked. "No time for a walk," she yelled back, grinning with a manic fire as she kicked open the shed door. Naruto shook his head. There was a time for subtlety and a time for speed. He appeared next to her in a flicker of movement that wasn't Shunpo, grabbing her by the arm. "Hold on." Before she could protest, he simply leapt. He didn't fly. He pushed off the ground with a single, chakra-infused burst of strength, launching them into the air in a soaring arc that would clear the distance to the 78th district in seconds. Byakuya Kuchiki was left standing alone in the courtyard, the wind gently whistling around him. The petals of his Zanpakuto rose from the ground and reformed into his blade, which he sheathed with a quiet, somber click. He had come here to enforce the law, to apprehend a threat. He had been defied, his power had been rendered useless. And his duty had been thrown in his face by the very Ryoka he was meant to arrest. He stood there for a long moment, the screams from the Rukongai echoing in the twilight. His mission was to take the intruder. His duty was to slay hollows and protect souls. The two were now in direct conflict. A conflict created by a man who operated by a set of rules Byakuya couldn't begin to comprehend. The weight of his name, of his position, felt heavier than it had in a century. He had a report to make. And the entire Soul Society was about to be shaken to its foundations. Chapter 3 End. Chapter 4. Whispers in the Shadows. The landing was less a graceful arrival and more a controlled demolition. Naruto touched down in the center of what passed for a main street in Junrinen, the impact cracking the packed earth beneath his feet. He gently set Kūkaku down beside him, his gaze already sweeping over the scene of unfolding horror. The air was thick with the stench of ozone, death, and a palpable, soul-crushing despair. Chaos reigned. The simple, ramshackle homes that lined the street were splintered and broken. Souls, their forms translucent with terror, scrambled over each other, trying to flee from the nightmares that had descended upon them. The smaller hollows, a swarm of grotesque insectoid and beast-like creatures, skittered through the alleys, their shrieks and clicks a horrifying chorus as they cornered their prey. Towering over it all, our heads scraping the bottom of the perpetual twilight, were the Manos Grande. 3 of them. They were colossal, slow-moving mountains of black cloaks and white masks, their featureless faces punctuated only by the long, Pinocchio-like noses. They were not attacking with finesse or strategy, they were simply engines of destruction. One of them opened a wide, cavernous mouth, and a crimson ball of energy began to form. A Sero aimed at a huddled group of terrified souls. The small friar mine, Kūkaku snapped, her eyes blazing with a protective fury. She was already moving, her hands a blur of motion as she wove the intricate signs for a Kido spell. "You take the big ones." Naruto didn't need to be told twice. He was a blur of orange and black, disappearing from Kūkaku's side. Bakudo number 73, Tozansho. Kūkaku slammed her palms onto the ground. An inverted pyramid of brilliant blue spiritual energy erupted from the earth, slamming into the side of a building and creating a barrier that yielded a large group of fleeing souls from the swarming lesser hollows. "Now for the fireworks," she roared, one hand already raised. Hado number 63, Soren Sokatsui. She unleashed a massive, twin-headed blast of blue fire from her palm. It wasn't a precise attack, it was a wave of pure destructive force. The torrent of energy washed through the street, incinerating a dozen of the smaller hollows in a single, roaring inferno. The display was magnificent, terrifying, and utterly Kūkaku. While she was handling crowd control, Naruto arrived at the base of the first Manos. The Jillian was still charging its Sero, a high-pitched whine filling the air. To the colossal creature, Naruto was a mere speck. It didn't even register his presence until he was halfway up its towering form, running straight up. The folds of its black cloak as if gravity were a suggestion he chose to ignore. He reached the mask, a blank canvas of white bone. He drew his right arm back, and a swirling sphere of brilliant blue chakra, compressed and spinning with furious power, materialized in his palm. It was a sound he knew better than his own heartbeat, the shriek of 1,000 birds. Rasengan. He slammed the sphere into the Manos' face. The impact was not an explosion, it was a grinding, annihilating force. The bone mask shattered, then dissolved. The chakra drilled its way through the creature's head, and a gaze of black spiritual particles erupted from the back of its skull. The high-pitched whine of the Sero died with a wet gurgle. The colossal body stood motionless for a second, a hollow statue, before it began to disintegrate, dissolving into black dust that was carried away on the wind. One down. The other two Manos turned their slow, ponderous attention towards him. Their collective response was to open their mouths and begin charging Seros of their own. Naruto landed lightly on the rooftop of a 2-story shack. He didn't give them the chance. He entered Sage mode in an instant. The orange pie, G-mentation around his eyes was the only outward sign, but the world snapped into focus with a clarity that was breathtaking. He could feel the life force of every terrified soul in the district, the malevolent hunger of every hollow. The very flow of the reishi in the air. The static that had been clouding his senses was gone, burned away by the infusion of pure nature energy. He crouched, gathering nature energy in his legs, and leapt. He wasn't just fast. He was a streak of golden light, crossing the distance between the two remaining Manos in a single, impossible bound. He flew between them, his arms outstretched. Sage art. Massive Rasengan. In each hand, he formed a Rasengan far larger than his own body, the churning spheres of chakra radiating immense power. He slammed them simultaneously into the sides of the two remaining Manos. The impact was devastating. The twin spheres of energy didn't just drill, they engulfed. The two giants were lifted from their feet, their massive foe. RMS caught in the grinding vortex of the two attacks, and were simply obliterated, torn apart and erased from existence in a silent, brilliant flash of blue and gold. The entire battle, from their arrival to the destruction of the three Manos Grande, had taken less than a minute. The remaining smaller hollows, their massive shepherds gone, seemed to falter. Their primal instinct screamed at them they were no longer the predators here. Kūkaku didn't give them a chance to rally. With another series of powerful Keto spells, she scoured the streets, her explosive art a beautiful and deadly dance. The surviving hollows broke, fleeing back towards whatever dark tear in reality they had spawned from. Silence fell. The souls of Junrinin slowly emerged from their hiding places, their faces a mixture of shock, awe, and a deep, primal fear. They stared at the two figures standing in the center of the destruction. At the fiery, powerful woman of the disgraced Shiba clan, and at the blonde straw Inger who had just erased three giants from existence as if they were nothing more than a nuisance. Naruto's sage mode faded, the orange markings receding. He looked at the devastation, at the trembling souls, and a familiar ache settled in his chest. He saw a small girl, no older than 7, crying silently over the still form of what must have been her mother, a faint chain leading from the woman's chest already beginning to corrode. He walked over, his footsteps soft. He knelt, his presence gentle, a stark contrast to the godlike power he had just displayed. "She's gone," he said softly, his voice full of a warmth that seemed alien in this bleak world. He placed a hand on the girl's head. A soft, golden glow enveloped her for a moment, a wave of pure, calming life energy that eased her terror and soothed her grief. If only for a second. It wouldn't bring her mother back, but it was all he could offer. At that moment, a loud, whistling roar filled the air, and a massive, smoking cannonball crashed into a nearby clearing. It split open, and Ganju and the Shiba retainers tumbled out, armed and ready for a fight. They looked around at the silent, hollow free street and the three moss sieve piles of black dust that were already scattering on the wind. Ganju said, scratching his head as he looked from the dust piles to Naruto. Did we miss it? Kūkaku walked over to Naruto, a tired but satisfied smirk on her face. You've got terrible timing, little brother, she said, before turning her gaze to Naruto. She looked at him, truly looked at him, and saw not a weapon or a monster, but the quiet sadness in his eyes as he comforted the orphaned girl. She had seen his power, and instead of being afraid, she felt a fierce surge of pride, and something else, something warmer and more dangerous, stir in her chest. The air in the 1st Division barracks was heavy enough to suffocate. The captains of the Gote 13 stood in 2 opposing lines, a silent assembly of the most powerful beings in the Soul Society. At the head of the room, seated with his ancient eyes closed, was Captain Commander Genryusai Shigekuni Yamamoto. Byakuya Kuchiki stood in the center of the room, his report concluded. He had delivered it with his usual stoic precision, detailing the Ryoka's abilities without emotion or embellishment, the complete nullification of his Bakudo, the effortless redirection of Senbon Sakura. The unknown energy source. The silence that followed his words was thick with disbelief and concern. To be clear, Captain Kuchiki, Shunsui Kyoraku said, his voice lazy but his eyes sharp from beneath the brim of his straw hat, you're saying your Shikai was not overpowered, but rendered irrelevant. Correct, Byakuya stated. He did not meet my force with greater force. He simply negated it, as if a fundamental law of nature had been bent to his will. A snort came from the other side of the room. Laws are made to be broken, Captain Kenpachi Zaraki said, a wide, thirsty grin splitting his scarred face. This guy, he sounds fun. I want to fight him. You want to fight everything that can stand on 2 legs, Kenpachi, the small form of Captain Sui Feng of the 2nd Division retorted. Her voice sharp. This is not a game. We have an entity of unknown origin and unquantifiable power sitting on our doorstep. He incapacitated a lieutenant and humiliated a captain in the span of an hour. He is a threat that must be purged. A threat who, according to the final reports, just single-handedly dispatched 3 Manos Grande and saved an entire Rukongai dist. RICT. While we were standing here talking, Captain Jashiro Yukataki countered, a coughing fit punctuating his sentence. His gentle face was filled with concern. His actions were those of a protector, not an invader. His actions are irrelevant. Mayuri Kuretsuchi cackled, his voice a distorted screech. His existence is what is so wonderfully fascinating. An energy that is not reishi. A body that nullifies Kido. Oh, the experiments I could conduct. I must have him. I will dissect him piece by piece and uncover all his glorious secrets. The debate raged, splitting the captains along familiar philosophical lines. Aggression versus observation. Fear versus curiosity. Duty versus pragmatism. Finally, Yamamoto tapped his heavy wooden cane on the floor. The sound was a single, sharp crack that instantly silenced the room. He opened his eyes, ancient and filled with a wisdom that had seen millennia. Enough. His voice rumbled, the voice of undisputed authority. The Ryoka's power is a matter of fact. His intentions remain unknown. An open assault on the Shiba compound is inadvisable. The risk of collateral damage, and the potential for a battle we do not yet understand, is too great. He swept his gaze over the assembled captains. Captain Kuretsuchi, your research division will analyze the energy signature from the site. Find out everything you can. Captain Sui Feng, your Onmitsukid. Will place the Shiba compound under constant, covert surveillance. I want to know when he breathes, when he sleeps. The rest of you will maintain a state of readiness. His eyes finally settled on Byakuya. We will watch, we will learn, and when the time is right, we will act. The decision was made. Not a war, not yet. A cold, silent siege. Deep beneath the Seraite, in a place forgotten by all but the oldest memories. A presence stirred. It was a place of absolute darkness, a prison crafted not just of stone and steel, but of layered Kido seals so ancient and complex they had become part of the very fabric of reality. For eons, it had slept, a faint, malevolent consciousness dreaming of hate and oblivion. But something had shaken its slumber. 2 massive bursts of an utterly alien energy. So bright and full of life they felt like a physical blow against the walls of its prison. The first, the firework, had been a curious tremor. The second, the battle with the hollows, was a full-blown earthquake. A sun, a thought, ancient and slow as grinding glaciers, echoed in the darkness. A new sun has risen in this faded, dying sky. On the surface of the central seal, a hairline crack, invisible to any eye, formed. A minuscule wisp of black, noxious energy, no larger than a mote of dust, seeped out. It was a thing of pure negation, an energy that did not exist so much as it unexisted everything it touched. The old fools, the ones who built this cage, they feared power, the presence mused. But power is a key. This new power, this warm, vibrant, impossible power, it will not be my destroyer. It will be my liberation. The wisp of darkness dissolved, its purpose fulfilled. It was a seed, planted in the soil of the Soul Society, waiting. The whispers in the shadows had begun. The false dawn was breaking, painting the sky in shades of violet and gray. Naruto and Kūkaku sat on the curved roof of her house, a comfortable silence between them. Below, Junrinin was slowly coming back to life. Ganju and her retainers were organizing recovery efforts, their loud voices a comforting, normal sound in the wake of the supernatural horror. They'll be watching, Kūkaku said, breaking the silence. She was nursing a gourd of sake, her movements slow and weary. The Gote 13. They won't attack, not after what you did. But they'll watch. Every shadow will have eyes. Let them, Naruto said. He was leaning back on his hands, looking up at the strange sky. I've had people watching me my whole life. It's nothing new. She turned to look at him, at his profile outlined against the dawn. She had seen the raw, untamed power of the fox in the sky, a display of wild, chaotic energy. Then she had seen him on the battlefield, a focused, disciplined engine of destruction. And after, she had seen him comfort a crying child with a gentleness that seemed completely at odds with the warrior he was. Who are you, Naruto Uzumaki? She asked, the question soft and genuine. He was quiet for a long moment, his gaze distant. I'm a shinobi from a village called Konoha, he said finally. I was a soldier. I fought in a war to protect my friends, my home. We won. But I got lost on the way back. He turned his head, his blue eyes meeting hers. The weariness in them was profound, an ancient exhaustion that went far beyond physical fatigue. I'm just a guy trying to find his way home. In that moment, she understood. The power, the fighting, it wasn't what defined him. It was a tool he used, a burden he carried. Beneath it all was a deep, aching loneliness she recognized because a version of it lived in her own heart. The loneliness of the outcast, the misunderstood, the one who was too much for the world to handle. Well, she said, her voice softer than he'd ever heard it. Until you find this home of yours, you've got a place here. The words were simple, but they landed with the weight of a promise. He had been adrift, a stranger in a strange land. And this fiery, unpredictable, fiercely loyal woman was offering him a sanctuary, an anchor. He reached out, his calloused fingers gently tucking a stray strand of her dark hair behind her ear. The gesture was hesitant, almost shy, but it was filled with an unspoken gratitude. Her skin was warm. She didn't pull away. Instead, she leaned into his touch, her sharp eyes closing for just a second. The walls she kept around herself, the fortress of bravado and defiance, seemed to melt away in that small moment. He leaned in, and she met him halfway. The kiss wasn't a firework. It wasn't an explosion of passion or a desperate, hungry claiming. It was quiet. It was tender. It was the meeting of two lonely souls in the twilight of a world that wasn't ready for either of them. It tasted of sake, sulfur, and the promise of a new, uncertain dawn. It was a moment of peace in the calm before a storm they both knew was coming. Chapter 4 End. Chapter 5. The Unforgivable Sin. The days that followed settled into a rhythm of fragile peace. A quiet defiance against the storm they knew was gathering just over the horizon. The Onmitsukido were a constant, unseen presence, their faint spiritual signatures like spiders lurking at the edge of a web. Naruto could feel them, a persistent itch at the edge of his senses, but he paid them no mind. They were observers, not a threat. Let them watch. He spent his time helping repair the damage to Junrinin. His seemingly limitless stamina a source of constant amazement to the locals. He could lift beams that would take 10 men to budge, work from dawn until the next dawn without tiring. And his touch seemed to mend more than just wood and stone. A quiet hope began to bloom in the dusty streets of the 78th district, a feeling that had been absent for generations. He wasn't one of them, but he was for them. The Shiba compound became a true home. He fell into an easy rapport with Kūkaku's boisterous retainers. He'd trade insults with Ganju, listen to Koganehiko and Shiroganehiko's stoic, surprisingly insightful observations, and share meals that were loud, chaotic, and filled with a warmth he hadn't realized he'd been missing so badly. He was in the courtyard, sparring with Ganju. The younger Shiba's wild, clumsy swings a source of endless amusement. Naruto moved with a liquid grace, redirecting Ganju's charges with a simple turn of his wrist or an open palm, ending the larger man stumbling past him time and again. "Hold still, damn you!" Ganju roared, launching a surprisingly powerful, if unrefined, blast of spiritual energy from his fist. Naruto simply wadded it out of the air like a bothersome fly. "You put too much power in your shoulders, Ganju. Your stance is all wrong. You're fighting with your anger, not your strength." "My anger is my strength." Ganju shot back, charging again. Kūkaku watched from the porch, leaning against a support beam with her arms crossed. A small, genuine smile played on her lips as she watched Naruto effortlessly handle her brother. He wasn't just deflecting Ganju, he was teaching him, his movements subtly guiding Ganju toward better form. In a few short days, he had become an inextricable part of their strange little family. The quiet ache of loneliness in her chest had lessened, replaced by a feeling so warm and bright it almost scared her. It was in that moment of placid domesticity that the sky was torn open. It wasn't the ragged, chaotic rip of a hollow's passage. This was a clean, deliberate tear in the fabric of the world, a vertical slash of absolute black that opened directly above their home. A garganta. From it poured a spiritual pressure so cold, so precise, it was like a shard of ice being driven into the soul. It was devoid of the mindless hunger of a hollow or the disciplined weight of a Shinigami. This was the pressure of a predator. An assassin. A figure stepped out of the blackness, hovering in the air for a moment before descending with a silent, weightless grace. He was an Urankar, but unlike the brutish Manos. He was elegance and malice given form. He was tall and slender, clad in the remnants of a white hakama and jacket, a black sash tied at his waist. The hole in his chest was a clean, perfect circle just above his sternum. The fragments of his hollow mask formed a sleek, metallic visor over his right eye, glowing with a faint crimson light. His left eye was a piercing, intelligent shade of amethyst. He landed in the center of the courtyard, his feet making no sound on the gravel. His gaze swept over the scene, dismissing Ganju, Koganehiko, and Shiroganehiko as if they were furniture. He gave Kūkaku a cursory, dismissive glance. Then, his eyes, one amethyst and one glowing crimson, locked onto Naruto. A slow, reptilian smile spread across his face. "So, it is true," the Urankar said, his voice smooth and cultured, yet carrying an undercurrent of metallic distortion from his mask. "The anomaly. The nexus of living energy in a world of the dead. Lord Azrael will be most pleased." Naruto stopped moving. His playful mood vanished, replaced by a deadly stillness. He stepped in front of Ganju, placing himself between the intruder and the rest of the family. "You need to leave," he said, his voice low and flat. The Urankar, Silas, let out a soft chuckle. "I will be leaving. With you. You are to be a gift for my master, a key to unlock his cage. Do not resist. It will only make your capture untidy." Ganju, never one for caution, bristled at the intruder's arrogance. "Who the hell do you think you are? You barge into our home." "Silence, insect," Silas said without even looking at him. He flicked his wrist. A tiny, compressed ball of red energy, a bala, shot from his fingertip. It moved faster than the eye could follow. "Ganju, move," Kūkaku screamed, but it was too late. The bala struck Ganju in the shoulder. It wasn't a large explosion, but it was brutally efficient. The blast punched clean through flesh and bone, and Ganju was thrown back like a ragdoll, a smoking, cauterized hole where his shoulder had been. He hit the porch with a sickening thud and lay still. Ganju. Kūkaku's roar was pure fury. She didn't hesitate. She was a blur of motion. Her hands already flying through Kido incantations. Hado number 88, Hiryu Gekizoku Shinton Raiho. A colossal dragon of pure lightning and spiritual energy erupted from her hands, a roaring avatar of her rage. It was a spell powerful enough to vaporize a captain, and she had cast it in an instant. The dragon surged across the courtyard, aimed at turning the arrogant Urankar into a memory. Silas watched it approach with an air of clinical detachment. Impressive. For a Shinigami, he didn't move to dodge. He simply raised his hand, and the air in front of him shimmered. The light Ing dragon crashed into an invisible barrier, its immense power dissipating with a deafening roar of thunder. Silas hadn't moved an inch. His Hiero, the steel-hard skin of an Urankar, was of a different class entirely. He had projected it, creating a shield of spiritual armor. Before the light of her attack had even faded, Silas was gone. He moved with Sonido, a burst of speed that left a faint sonic boom in his wake. He reappeared directly in front of Kūkaku, his hand drawn back. She was fast, a master of combat, but he was faster. His open palm strike caught her in the stomach. The blow was precise, devastating. All the air left her lungs in a choked gasp, and she was launched backwards, crashing through the wooden wall of her own home, splintered wood and debris flying everywhere. Everything went silent. Naruto stood in the center of the courtyard. He looked at Ganju's unmoving form. He looked at the hole in the wall where Kūkaku had disappeared. A single drop of her blood had spattered onto the ground near his feet. The air grew cold. The dust motes in the air seemed to freeze. Silas, his victory assured, turned his attention back to Naruto, his smile widening. You see, resistance is pointless. Your protectors are broken. Now, you will. He stopped. The words died in his throat. The pressure in the courtyard was changing. The warm, vibrant energy that Naruto naturally exuded was gone. In its place was something else. Something vast, ancient, and utterly terrifying. It was the pressure of a deity awakening from a long slumber, and it was not happy. Naruto lifted his head. His eyes, once the color of a clear blue sky, were now a molten gold, the pupils slitted like a predator's. A cross-like pattern bloomed within them. A brilliant, sun-yellow cloak of pure chakra erupted around him. So bright it bleached the color from the world. It billowed and churned like a miniature sun, 9 flowing tails of energy whipping behind him. The whisker marks on his cheeks became thick and black, and a black truth-seeking orb, a sphere of malleable nothingness that negated all ninjutsu, materialized and hovered silently behind his shoulder. The sheer spiritual density of the transformation was a physical force. The ground beneath Naruto's feet cracked and splintered. The air itself seemed to bend around him. Silas's smug expression dissolved into a mask of pure, primal terror. His senses, honed for battle and predation, were screaming at him. This wasn't a Shinigami. This wasn't a Quincy. This wasn't a Ki. This was a god of fire and life and unimaginable rage. The sophisticated Urankar was reduced to a frightened animal, his instincts telling him to run, to flee, to do anything but be in the presence of this being. You hurt my family, Naruto said. His voice was a duet, his own overlaid with a deep, demonic rumble. The sound vibrated in Silas's very bones. In my home. Silas forced himself to act, his training overriding his terror. He fired a Sero, a massive, crimson beam of destructive energy, directly at Naruto's face. Naruto didn't even bother to dodge. He raised one hand, and the truth-seeking orb flew to his palm, instantly expanding into a thin, black shield. The Sero struck the shield and was simply erased. It didn't explode. It didn't deflect. It was unmade, its energy completely nullified. Before Silas could even process this, Naruto was gone. He didn't use Sonido. He was simply there, standing in front of the Urankar, his golden form radiating an almost unbearable heat. Silas threw a punch, his Hiero-clad fist moving at impossible speeds. Naruto caught it. His chakra-cloaked hand closed around Silas's fist, and with a sickening crunch, the unbreakable Urankar's skin shattered like glass. Silas screamed, a high-pitched sound of pain and disbelief. Naruto's other hand shot out, not in a fist, but an open palm, striking Silas in the chest. It was a gentle push, yet it carried the force of a tectonic plate. Silas was launched across the courtyard, skipping off the ground like a stone on water before plowing through the far wall of the compound. This wasn't a fight, it was a vivisection. Naruto appeared above the broken Urankar. High in his hand, a new sound shrieked to life. A whirring, grinding noise that seemed to cut the very air. It was a Rasengan, but it was black and red, a swirling vortex of molten rock. Sage art. Lava-style Rasenshuriken. He brought the attack down. Silas, broken and terrified, could only watch as the miniature star descended. The impact was an explosion of magma and razor-sharp wind. It didn't just cut, it melted. It vaporized. Silas's resurrection, which he had desperately tried to activate, was shredded before it could even form. His body was immolated, his defenses turned to slag. But the attack stopped just short of killing him. Naruto's control was absolute. Silas was left a broken, smoldering wreck, pinned to the ground by a single, golden chakra rod that had extended from Naruto's palm. He was alive, conscious, and trapped in unimaginable agony. Naruto descended, his golden aura casting a terrifying light on the Arrancar's ruined form. He knelt, placing a hand on Silas's head. "You mentioned a master," Naruto's dual voice echoed, devoid of all emotion. "You mentioned a cage. You're going to tell me everything." He didn't wait for an answer. He closed his eyes, and his Sage of Six Paths power surged, creating a direct link between their minds. He didn't ask for the information. He took it. He saw flashes of a great, shadowy being sealed in darkness. He heard the name Azrael, a primordial entity that predated the Soul King. He understood its goal. Azrael felt Naruto's unique, living chakra, a power that existed outside the laws of Reishi, and believed it could be used as a key to shatter the ancient seals, to achieve its final liberation and correct the flawed reality the Shinigami had built. This was no random attack. Naruto was the specific target. He saw Silas's mission, to capture him, to bring the key to the lock. Naruto pulled his hand away, the mental link severed. He had what he needed. He looked down at the broken Arrancar, whose mind had been scoured clean. There was no pity in his eyes. Only judgment. "You made a mistake coming here," he said. He raised his hand, and a small, black orb of condensed chakra formed. A tailed beast bomb, miniaturized to the size of a marble, yet containing enough power to level a mountain. He dropped it. The resulting explosion was a silent, perfect sphere of black and white light that completely consumed Silas, leaving not even dust behind. The unforgivable sin of harming his family had been answered with absolute annihilation. The golden cloak of chakra receded, the truth-seeking orb dissolved. And his eyes returned to their normal blue. The god was gone, and the man was back. He turned and sprinted back into the courtyard, his heart pounding with fear. Koganehiko and Shiroganehiko were already tending to Ganju, who was unconscious but alive. Naruto skidded to a halt beside the hole in the wall, peering into the dusty, splintered darkness. Kūkaku. He saw her, slumped against the far wall. A trickle of blood at the corner of her mouth. He was at her side in an instant, gently lifting her into his arms. Her breathing was shallow. He placed his palm over her wound, and a gentle, green chakra flowed from his hand. The mystical palm technique. The light knitted her torn flesh and mended her bruised organs, the healing far faster and more potent than any Kido. Her eyes fluttered open. She looked up and saw not the terrifying golden god who had just annihilated their enemy, but Naruto's face, his features etched with worry and fear for her. She saw the boy from another world. The lonely soul who called this place his home. She reached up, her hand shaking slightly, and her fingers brushed against the whisker marks on his cheek. Her thumb traced the lines, a gesture of profound intimacy in the midst of the wreckage. She wasn't afraid of the power she had just witnessed. She was in awe of it. The golden demon and the gentle healer were the same man, and he was hers to protect. Just as he had protected her. "You're an idiot," she whispered, her voice hoarse. "You almost got yourself killed." It was her way of saying thank you. He just shook his head, a relieved smile finally breaking through his worry. "Had to protect my landlord, didn't I?" He helped her to her feet, and they stood for a moment, leaning on each other in the ruins of their home. The immediate threat was gone. But the knowledge Naruto had ripped from Silas's mind hung heavy in the air. This was just a messenger. The real monster was still in its cage, and now it knew exactly where to find the key. Chapter 5 End. Chapter 6. An Alliance of Convenience. The silence that followed the annihilation was heavy, broken only by the groans of stressed wood and the distant, panicked shouts from the Souls in Junrinin who had felt the earth-shattering tremor. The courtyard was a ruin. A deep, glassy crater marked the spot where Silas had ceased to exist. The compound walls were breached, and the main house was a splintered wreck. A gaping hole torn through its side. Naruto's attention was a laser, focused entirely on the two people he had, in a remarkably short time, come to consider his. Ganju was stable. The bleeding stopped by Koganehiko's surprisingly gentle field dressing, but his breathing was ragged. Naruto knelt beside him, his hands glowing with the soft green of the mystical palm technique. He worked methodically, mending the shattered collarbone, knitting the torn muscles back together, pushing his chakra into Ganju's system to stabilize his life force. "He's strong," Naruto murmured, more to himself than to the anxious retainers watching over him. "But the damage was severe. I can stabilize him, but he'll need time to truly heal." He then moved to Kūkaku, who was sitting on the ruined porch. Her back straight despite the pain, a silent fury in her eyes as she stared at the destruction. She waved away his offer of more healing. "I'm fine," she said, her voice a low growl. "Heal Ganju. That bastard. That thing. It came here for you, but it hurt my family. It tried to take from me. Again." The last word was heavy with the weight of her past, of Kaian, of the life she'd lost. Naruto's hand rested on her shoulder, a silent offering of comfort that she accepted, leaning into his touch ever so slightly. The rage radiating from her was a palpable force, but beneath it, he could feel a tremor of fear. Not for herself, but for the people she had sworn to protect. They both felt the approach at the same time. Not the skittering presence of spies in the shadows, but the stately, powerful arrival of multiple, captain-class spiritual pressures. They appeared at the edge of the ruined compound, not with aggression, but with a heavy, somber formality. Leading the delegation was Captain Shunsui Kiraku, his usual lazy demeanor offset by the gravity of his expression. Beside him stood the gentle, white-haired Captain Jashiro Yukitaki, his face etched with concern. A step behind them was Captain Retsu Unohana of the 4th Division, her placid smile doing nothing to hide the unnerving intensity in her eyes. It was a delegation chosen for a specific purpose: diplomacy, compassion, and an underlying absolute authority. "Kūkaku Dono," Shunsui began, his voice soft as he surveyed the devastation. He tipped his straw hat, a gesture of respect that seemed shockingly genuine. "It seems we are a little late to the party. I hope we're not interrupting." Kūkaku rose to her feet, her posture stiff with ingrained hostility. "What do you want, Kiraku? Come to finish the job. Arrest us for littering with Arankar guts?" "Nothing of the sort," Yukitaki said, his voice kind. He looked at Ganju's still form, and a flicker of genuine pain crossed his features. Kaian Shiba had been his lieutenant, his friend. The remaining Shibas were, in a way, his responsibility. "We saw the Garganta, we felt the battle, and we felt its conclusion." He looked at Naruto, his gaze filled not with suspicion, but with a profound, searching curiosity. "We are not here as enforcers. We are here because the Captain Commander requests a parley." The word hung in the air, utterly unexpected. The Gote 13 did not parley with Ryoka or disgraced nobles. They gave orders. This was a fundamental shift in the rules. Kūkaku's eyes narrowed. "And why should I believe a word that comes out of the Seraite's mouth? Your people were spying on us. Your captain attacked us. You've done nothing to earn our trust. And you have done nothing to earn ours," Unohana said, her voice serene but her words sharp as a scalpel. "And yet, an enemy that could breach the Soul Society's defenses and level this compound has appeared. It would seem our mutual distrust is a luxury we can no longer afford." She was right. Naruto knew it. Kūkaku, for all her bluster, knew it too. The knowledge he'd ripped from Silas's mind, of Azrael, of the cage, of being the key, was a world-ending threat that dwarfed any grudge between the Shiba clan and the Gote 13. Naruto stepped forward, moving to stand beside Kūkaku. "We'll talk," he said, his voice carrying the calm authority of a man used to making battlefield decisions. "Here, now." Shunsui's eyes crinkled in a small smile. "Direct. I can appreciate that." He gestured, and he and Yukitaki took a few steps forward, leaving Unohana to immediately move towards Ganju. She knelt, her own healing Kido glowing a soft, warm green as she began her diagnosis, a silent act of goodwill that was more powerful than any words. "My name is Shunsui Kyoraku," the captain said, addressing Naruto directly. "This is Jashiro Yukitake. We mean you no harm. But you must understand our position. An energy of impossible magnitude appears in our world, attached to a man of unknown origin. You fight our officers, display abilities that defy our understanding of physics, and then you do whatever it is you did to that Arankar. The captain commander needs to understand what we are facing." Naruto met his gaze, sensing the sharp intellect hidden beneath the lazy exterior. This was a man he could reason with. "What you're facing," Naruto began, his voice dropping, "is bigger than me. And bigger than your Gote 13. He laid it all out, his words direct and stripped of any embellishment. He told them about the Arankar, Silas. He described the cold, predatory intelligence. So different from a mindless hollow. He spoke the name he had heard in Silas's mind, Azrael. A primordial being, sealed away before the time of the Soul King, who saw the current order of the worlds as a flaw to be erased. It wants to get out," Naruto concluded, his gaze sweeping over the two captains, who were listening with rapt attention, their casual demeanors gone. "And it thinks I'm the key. My energy, my chakra, it's not from this world. It doesn't follow your rules. Azrael believes it can use my power to shatter its prison." A heavy silence descended. Shunsui and Yukitake exchanged a long, meaningful look. The name Azrael was not in any common Seraite record, but Naruto could see a flicker of something in their eyes, a hint of an old, forgotten story, a whisper from the dawn of their history. "This is a grave accusation," Yukitake said, his voice heavy. "To claim a being of such magnitude exists, it would rewrite the foundations of our history. Look around you," Kūkaku cut in, gesturing to the crater. "Does this look like some random hollow attack to you? That thing came for him, and it was stronger than any Manos have ever seen. Believe him." Before the debate could continue, a new voice, laced with an infuriatingly cheerful tone, sliced through the tension. My, it seems I've missed all the fun. A Garganta, a high-level Arankar, and a secret parley between the Gote 13 and its most wanted. It's like a festival." Kazuki Urahara appeared, leaning casually on his cane, his signature striped bucket hat hiding his eyes. Yoruichi Shihoin, in her black cat form, was perched on his shoulder. He had simply walked in through the shattered main gate, completely undetected by anyone. "Urahara," Kūkaku snarled, though there was a hint of relief in her voice. "You have the worst timing of anyone I've ever met." "On the contrary," Urahara said, his fan snapping open to hide the lower half of his face. "My timing is impeccable." He looked at Naruto, his hidden eyes sharp with calculation. "The energy signature from your final attack was quite remarkable. A perfect sphere of contained annihilation. Not Reishi-based at all. It was foundational, like you were forcing the laws of this world to bend to a different set of rules entirely." He then turned to Shunsui and Yukitake. "He's telling the truth, you know. Or, at least, a version of it consistent with all my data." He tapped his temple. "I've been monitoring the dimensional frequencies for some time. There's been an increase in instability, faint tremors originating from a single, possibly deep point within the Soul Society itself. Something is waking up, and this young man's arrival," he gestured to Naruto with his fan, "seems to have been the alarm clock." Urahara's intervention was the tipping point. He was an exile, a wild card, but his genius was undeniable. If he was corroborating Naruto's story, it had to be taken as a serious possibility. "So what's the plan, captains?" Naruto asked, pressing the advantage. "You can keep treating me like a threat, waste your time and resources watching me, while the real enemy gathers its strength. Or, we can work together. Pool our knowledge. I can tell you what I know about this Azrael. You can tell me what you know about this world. We can figure out how to stop it. Together." It was a simple, logical proposal, delivered with the straightforward charisma of a natural leader. He wasn't asking for their trust. He was offering a pragmatic solution to a shared, existential threat. Shunsui looked at Yukitake. Yukitake looked at Unohana, who had finished her work on Ganju and was now standing silently, listening. A silent conversation passed between the three senior captains. They had come here expecting to deal with a powerful but manageable anomaly. They were leaving with the knowledge that a mythological level threat was stirring, and the anomaly was the only one who had any real intelligence on it. The Captain Commander will need to be briefed, Shunsui said finally, his voice now devoid of all laziness. But I believe your proposal has merit. An alliance of convenience, for now. He looked Naruto in the eye. We will provide you with access to our archives, our intelligence. In return, you will share everything you learn. And you will fight with us when the time comes. I was going to fight anyway, Naruto replied simply. He hurt my friends. Quote, the terms were set. The deal was struck, not with a handshake, but with a quiet, mutual understanding in the ruins of the Shiba home. The Gote 13 were no longer his enemies. They were now, for all intents and purposes, his allies. We will take our leave, Ukitake said. Captain Unohana has stabilized Ganju Dono. He should be moved to the 4th Division barracks for proper recovery. Kūkaku started to protest, her distrust of the Seraite flaring up, but Naruto put a hand on her arm. He'll be safer there, he said softly. They have the best healers. Let them help. She looked from Naruto's trusting face to Ukitake's earnest one, and finally gave a short, sharp nod. The tension had broken, replaced by the heavy weight of their new reality. As the captains prepared to depart, Yoruichi leapt from Urahara's shoulder and trotted over to Naruto, rubbing against his leg. Naruto knelt, scratching the cat behind the ears with an easy familiarity. You handle yourself well. Yoruichi's voice, feminine and amused, echoed directly in his mind, a form of telepathy he hadn't expected. You've turned the entire Gote 13 from antagonists into allies in a single conversation. Not bad for a lost boy. Naruto just smiled, continuing to scratch. Had a lot of practice talking my way out of trouble. And into it, she purred, before leaping back to Urahara's shoulder. With a final nod, the Shinigami were gone, taking Ganju with them in a gentle Kido-based stretcher. Urahara gave a final, cryptic wave before he too vanished into the shadows, leaving Naruto. And Kūkaku standing alone amidst the wreckage. The immediate danger was over, but the world had suddenly become infinitely larger and more dangerous. They were no longer just outcasts hiding in the Rukongai. They were players in a cosmic game, allied with a military force they didn't trust, against an enemy they didn't understand. Kūkaku let out a long, shaky breath, the adrenaline finally leaving her system. She surveyed her ruined home, the symbol of her family's defiant pride, now shattered. An alliance of convenience, she muttered, kicking at a piece of splintered wood. Sounds like a damn headache. Probably, Naruto agreed, coming to stand beside her. But it's better than fighting a war on two fronts. She looked at him, at the quiet strength in his eyes. The world had just been turned upside down. But with him standing there, it felt manageable. So, she said, a hint of her old, fiery smirk returning. What's the first move for the Grand Shiba Uzumaki alliance? Naruto looked towards the distant, impossibly high walls of the Seraite. First, he said, we go to the library. I have a feeling the story of this Azrael isn't completely forgotten. And then, we get ready. The first one was just a messenger. The next one won't be. He held out his hand. She looked at it for a moment, then took it, her calloused fingers lacing with his. Their home was in ruins, but they were together. And for the first time, they were not just reacting. They were preparing to fight back. Chapter 6 End. Chapter 7. The heart of the matter. The truce held. It was a strange, disquieting peace. Like the stillness in the air before a typhoon. Ganju was recovering in the 4th Division's care, a situation that left Kūkaku perpetually on edge, caught between her gratitude for the expert healing and her deep-seated distrust of anything related to the Seraite. The Shiba compound was a hive of activity, with her retainers working tirelessly to rebuild their home, the sounds of ham, RS and saws a defiant rhythm against the looming threat. Naruto moved among them, a quiet pillar of strength. He had become the eye of their small hurricane. But in the quiet moments, when the work was done and the twilight deepened, Kūkaku would see him staring towards the distant white walls of the Seraite, a look of profound concentration on his face. He was a man trying to read the map of a foreign country in a language he was only just beginning to understand. It was during one of these quiet evenings, as they sat on the newly rebuilt porch watching the unchanging sky, that he broke the silence. "I need to see it," he said. His voice soft but firm. Kūkaku didn't have to ask what he meant. The question hung in the air between them, unspoken but ever present. The source of her pain, the ghost that defined her family's fall. "There's nothing to see," she said, her voice tight. "Just a pile of dust and bad memories. I need to understand," he pressed gently, turning to look at her. His blue eyes were serious, free of judgment. "You told me what happened to your brother, to your clan. But words are just words. I need to feel it. If I'm going to stand with you, truly stand with you, I can't be fighting shadows. I need to know what haunts you, Kūkaku." Her first instinct was to lash out, to tell him to mind his own business, to throw up the fiery walls of defiance that had protected her for so long. But the sincerity in his gaze disarmed her. He wasn't being morbidly curious. He was trying to map the landscape of her soul, to find the places where the monsters hid so he could help her fight them. It was a level of intimacy that was both terrifying and something she desperately craved. "It's inside the Seraite," she said, a final, weak attempt at deflection. "In the Nobles District. We can't just walk in." Quote, "We can now," he countered. "We're allies, remember, of convenience." He gave a small, wry smile. "Time to see if they'll honor their end of the bargain." She held his gaze for a long moment. A silent, internal war raging within her. Then, with a slow, shaky sigh, she gave a single, sharp nod. "Fine, but if any of those Kuchiki bastards even looks at me wrong, I'm blowing a hole in their manicured garden." "Fair enough," he said, his smile becoming genuine. He squeezed her hand, a simple gesture of reassurance that anchored her in the swirling storm of her own memories. Their passage through the Seraite was a strange and tense affair. Their new status afforded them an official escort, two stoic, high-ranking members of the 2nd Division, but it did little to quell the stares. As they walked the clean, unnaturally orderly streets, Shinigami would stop and watch them pass, their whispers following them like a trail of smoke. They were an oddity, the infamous Shiba exile and the mysterious Ryoka who had brought a captain to a standstill. The Nobles District was another world entirely. The air was cleaner, the reishi richer. Sprawling estates sat behind high, pristine walls. The sounds of wind chimes and trickling water replacing the bustle of the barracks. It was a world of serene, suffocating privilege. Then they reached their destination. The Shiba estate was not just abandoned, it was cordoned off, a testament to its disgrace. The great wooden gates were sealed, but the escort opened them with a quiet, formal efficiency. They stepped through, and the sounds of the Seraite died away, replaced by a profound and heavy silence. The estate was a ghost. The gardens, once meticulously cared for, were now a wild, overgrown jungle. Dust, thick as a blanket, covered everything, muting the once vibrant colors of the wooden verandas. The paper screens of the main house were torn and yellowed, rattling in a wind no one could feel. It was a place where time had stopped, frozen on the worst day of Kūkaku's life. She walked with a rigid posture, her face a stone mask, but Naruto could feel the turmoil rolling off her in waves. He stayed close, a silent presence at her side, letting her lead them through the skeletal remains of her past. She led him to the back of the manor, to a wide, open dojo, its floorboards warped and broken. "This was it," she said, her voice a raw whisper. "This is where Kaion, this is where he taught, where he fought it, where he died." Naruto looked around, his sage senses tingling. The reishi in this place was strange. It was thick with residue, echoes of powerful emotions, love, pride, terror, despair. It was a scar on the face of the world, and as he focused, he felt something else. A faint, cold presence, a subtle, malignant intelligence that was using the emotional residue as a lens, focusing its attention on them. Azrael. It couldn't touch them, not yet. But it could watch, and it could whisper. The air grew colder. The dust motes in the air began to swirl, forming strange, fleeting patterns. A whisper, faint as a dying breath, seemed to slither into Naruto's ear. "You don't belong here, outsider." He tensed, his eyes scanning the empty dojo. Kūkaku hadn't seemed to hear it. She was staring at a dark stain on the floorboards, lost in her own nightmare. "Kūkaku," he said, his voice sharp with a sudden urgency. We should go. But it was too late. The world shimmered. The dust, the decay, the silence, it all dissolved. The broken dojo was suddenly whole again, the wood polished and gleaming. The overgrown garden outside was pristine, cherry blossoms drifting on a gentle breeze. The air was filled with the sounds of sparring, the clash of wooden swords and determined shouts. And standing in the center of the dojo, smiling at them, was a man with wild black hair and a compassionate, familiar face. Kūkaku Shiba. Kūkaku gasped, a choked, strangled sound. Her stone mask shattered, replaced by a look of pure, agonizing disbelief. Kūkaku. The illusionary Kūkaku's smile was warm, but his eyes were filled with a deep, sorrowful disappointment. You let it happen, Kūkaku, he said. His voice gentle but every word a dagger. You were the explosives expert. The master of Kido. But you weren't strong enough to save me. You let me die. You let our family's name be dragged through the mud. No, she whispered, taking a step back. I tried. At the same time, Naruto's world was also changing. The dojo walls became the familiar green forests surrounding Konoha. The figures paring in the background morphed into his friends, his comrades. And standing before him were Sakura and Sasuke, their faces not filled with warmth, but with cold, bitter accusation. You left us, Naruto, Sakura said, her voice hard, devoid of its usual kindness. You won the war and then you just abandoned us. We needed you. Your world needed you. But you ran away. You always were a failure, Sasuke added, his Sharingan blazing to life. You couldn't save me from the darkness. You couldn't save the world without help. And now you've found a new world to fail. A new set of friends to disappoint. The two illusions began to converge, the phantoms of their pasts turning their accusatory gazes on the person their victim cherished most. Who is this woman, Kūkaku? Kūkaku asked, his eyes arrowing with disgust as he looked at Naruto. This monster. His power is a blight. It reeks of a demon. He will be your ruin, just as you were mine. Look at him, Naruto, Sakura said, pointing a trembling finger at Kūkaku. She's just like the rest of them. They see your power, the 9 tails, and they want to use it. She's no different from the Akatsuki. She'll use you, and when she's done, she'll cast you aside. You'll be alone. Again. The psychological assault was relentless, perfectly crafted to strike at their deepest, most secret fears. Loneliness, failure, betrayal, inadequacy. They were trapped in separate, converging hells, the illusions feeding on their pain, growing stronger with every tear, every flicker of doubt. Kūkaku was on her knees, tears streaming down her face as the ghost of her brother condemned her. Naruto stood frozen, the words of his closest friends cutting him deeper than any blade ever could. For a moment, the illusion was winning. The doubt was a poison, seeping into their hearts. But then, through his own anguish, Naruto looked past the phantoms of his friends and saw Kūkaku. He saw her shoulders shaking, heard her choked sobs. He saw her pain, a pain so profound it mirrored his own. And in that moment, a fierce, protective clarity burned through the illusion's fog. His friends, the real Sakura and Sasuke, had fought and bled and nearly died for him. They had their issues, their arguments, but they would never, ever speak to him like this. This was a lie, a cruel, twisted lie. But Kūkaku's pain, that was real. No, Naruto whispered, his voice raw. He took a step, pushing through the phantom of Sasuke as if he were smoke. The illusionary figures of his friends flickered, their voices rising to a fever pitch, screaming his failures at him. He ignored them. He had one focus, one reality. He stumbled across the phantom dojo, his legs feeling like lead. He reached Kūkaku and knelt in front of her, grabbing her by the shoulders. She flinched, her eyes wide with terror, still seeing the ghost of her brother. Kūkaku, listen to me, he said, his voice urgent. It's not real. It's a lie. He's right, she sobbed. I wasn't strong enough. I let him die. Look at me, he commanded, his voice a sharp crack that momentarily cut through the whispers. He forced her to meet his eyes. Maybe you weren't strong enough then. And maybe I did fail my friends in the past. Maybe I am lost. His voice broke, the pain of the illusion's words still echoing in his soul. But that's the past. Right here, right now, you and I are real. This, he said, his grip on her shoulders grounding her, is real. He saw the flicker of recognition in her eyes. She was still seeing Kyan over his shoulder, but she was also seeing him. He pressed on, his own heart laid bare. They told me you'd use me, that you'd leave me alone. But you didn't. You took me in. You fought for me. You gave me a home when I didn't have one. I trust you, Kūkaku Shiba. More than I trust these ghosts. His words were the key. Trust. In a world of illusion and psychological warfare, it was the one thing their enemy couldn't replicate. Kūkaku stared at him, at the raw vulnerability on his face. She saw his pain, his fear of loneliness, and recognized it as her own. She had built her life around her brother's memory, around her guilt. But that memory was now a weapon being used against her. The man in front of her, this impossible, powerful, gentle man, he was not a memory. He was here, he was real, and he was fighting through his own hell to save her from hers. He told me you were a monster. She whispered, her voice trembling but gaining strength. But he's wrong. You're not. You're just Naruto. She reached up, her hands tangling in the front of his jacket, pulling him closer. I'm with you, she said, her voice fierce with a newfound conviction. Not with the ghosts. The moment their belief in each other became stronger than their belief in their fears, the illusion shattered. The gleaming dojo, the cherry blossoms, the phantoms of their past, they all dissolved in a screech of tearing reality. They were back in the ruined, dusty hall, kneeling on the broken floorboards. Clinging to each other as if they were the only solid things in the universe. The cold presence was gone, having retreated in the face of their combined will. They were left in the silence, emotionally scoured. Their souls laid bare. They stayed like that for a long time, just holding each other, their breathing slowly returning to normal. Finally, Kūkaku pulled back, her eyes red but clear. She looked at the dark stain on the floor, the place where her brother had died. The memory was still painful, a sharp, cutting ache. But it no longer had the power to paralyze her. Naruto had shown her that the past was a place to be remembered, not a place to live. Thank you, she said, the words simple, but carrying the weight of her entire world. He simply nodded, his own throat tight with emotion. He had faced down gods and monsters, but the accusations of his friends, even fake ones, had almost broken him. Her trust had been his shield. He stood, pulling her to her feet. They walked out of the dojo, out of the ruined manor, and back into the sterile streets of the Seraite, leaving the ghosts of the Shiba clan to their slumber. They didn't speak. They didn't need to. Something profound had shifted between them. The passionate, fragile bond forged in the heat of battle and shared defiance had been tempered in the fires of their deepest fears. It was no longer just a romance. It was an unbreakable partnership, a promise that no matter what horrors the world threw at them, they would never, ever be alone. Chapter 7 End. Chapter 8. The Divine and the Damned. Days that followed their return from the haunted Shiba estate were marked by a tense, focused energy. The alliance, once a mere convenience, had become a functioning reality. Blueprints and intelligence reports from the Seraite now lay scattered across the tables of the rebuilt Shiba compound, next to Kūkaku's own explosive formulas. Captain Ukitake had become a frequent, gentle presence, his shared grief over Kyan forming an unlikely bridge of trust with Kūkaku. Even Yoruichi, in her human form, would appear unannounced, bringing cryptic warnings from Urahara and challenging Naruto to pars that were less about fighting and more about pushing him to adapt his chakra to the reishi-saturated world. It was during one such session, the two of them a blur of orange and black in the courtyard, that the world went wrong. It started not with a sound, but with a feeling. A deep, discordant hum that resonated in the soul, like a string on a massive instrument being plucked by a malevolent hand. Naruto froze mid-strike, his sage senses screaming a silent, incoherent warning. High above, the perpetual twilight of the Soul Society began to bleed. A dark, viscous liquid, like black ink in water, spread across the sky. Centered directly over the distant walls of the Seraite. Then, the sky tore. It was not the clean slash of a garganta. This was a ragged, bleeding wound in the fabric of reality itself. From this gaping celestial wound, a pressure poured forth that was unlike anything before. It was not the predatory cold of Silas, nor the hungry void of a hollow. It was the pressure of absolute nothingness. A suffocating vacuum of anti-existence that promised not death, but erasure. And from the wound, they fell. Legions of them. They were not Urankar, nor were they hollows. They looked like souls, twisted into nightmarish parodies of their former selves. Their forms shimmered and warped, their faces frozen in silent screams. Where their soul chains should have been, there were only black, smoking voids. These were the echoes, the damned souls Azrael had consumed and reforged into a legion of nihilistic weapons. Gods above, Yoruichi breathed, her playful demeanor gone, replaced by the grim focus of a seasoned commander. It's begun. Across the Seraite, alarms blared, their frantic, clanging tones a stark contrast to the horrifying silence of the descending army. The Gote 13 moved as one. Squads of Shinigami flooded the streets, their Zanpakuto drawn. The captains appeared on the rooftops, their colorful haori a defiant splash of color against the darkening sky. All captains, engage at will. Yamamoto's voice boomed across the Seraite, a rumbling command that was the herald of war. Show these abominations the fury of the Gote 13. The battle was joined. Byakuya Kuchiki's Senbon Sakura became a swirling pink vortex of death, shredding dozens of echoes at a time. Kenpachi Zaraki's laughter was a terrifying battle cry as he cleaved through the enemy ranks. His raw power a force of nature. Hitsugaya's Hirenmaru unleashed a colossal ice dragon that froze 100 of the invaders solid. But the echoes were relentless. They felt no pain, no fear. And for every one that fell, 2 more seemed to take its place. Worse, they fought with a chilling, hive-mind coordination. They would sacrifice themselves by the dozen to create an opening for a single focused strike against a lieutenant or a seated officer. They were unmaking the very reishi of the Seraite, the ground turning black and brittle wherever they fell. The Shinigami were fighting with righteous fury. But they were fighting a tide of pure negation. Naruto and Kūkaku didn't wait for an invitation. Shiroganehiko, Koganehiko, defend this house with your lives. Kūkaku commanded, her eyes already blazing with the light of Kido. The rest of you, with me. You're not going alone, Naruto said, appearing at her side. Yoruichi landed silently next to them, her face grim. Kūkaku looked at him, then at the sky above the Seraite. This is their home, their fight. You are my home, he replied, his voice a low, unwavering statement of fact. Your fight is my fight. A fierce, brilliant grin flashed across her face. Then let's go give these bastards a fireworks show they'll never forget. They didn't need a cannon. Naruto grabbed Kūkaku and Yoruichi, and with a single, chakra-fueled leap, they launched themselves over the walls and into the heart of the chaos. They landed in a plaza where the 13th Division was being overwhelmed. The echoes were a swarming tide, the IR touch causing the Shinigami's blades to hiss and corrode. Their arrival was like a thunderclap. Stand back, Kūkaku roared, landing in a crouch. Her hands were already a blur. Bakudo number 81. Danku. A massive, translucent wall of energy erupted, a shimmering barrier that slammed into the charging horde and held them back, giving the beleaguered Shinigami a vital moment to breathe. All right, pretty boy, your turn, she yelled. Naruto shot past her, a golden streak of light. He entered Sage mode, the world snapping into perfect focus. He moved through the echoes not as a warrior, but as a force of nature. He didn't need grand techniques. A simple touch, infused with his living chakra, was anathema to their death-based energy. He would tap an echo on the shoulder, and it would dissolve into dust. A sweep of his leg would unravel a dozen more. His Rasengan was not a weapon of destruction here, but of purification, each impact erasing the twisted souls from existence with a flash of cleansing blue light. Their synergy was a deadly work of art. Kūkaku was the artillery, her powerful Kido spells blasting huge holes in the enemy formations, controlling the flow of battle with walls of force and dragons of lightning. Yoruichi was a phantom, a blur of motion at the edges of the fight, assassinating the larger, more powerful echoes with her mastery of Hakuda. And Naruto was the spearhead, the unstoppable force at the center of it all, his every move precise, efficient, and utterly devastating. The desperate battle in the plaza turned into a one-sided slaughter. But Azrael had not sent only foot soldiers. From the tear in the sky, a new figure descended, its spiritual pressure eclipsing all others on the battlefield. It was humanoid, its body seemingly woven from solidified shadows and shattered starlight. It had no face, only a smooth, porcelain-white mask from which 4 obsidian horns curved back like a crown. This was the herald, the right hand of the forgotten god. It ignored the chaos below, its eyeless gaze sweeping the battlefield until it found its target. Not Naruto, but the most visible symbol of the Seraite's military order. Captain Sui Feng of the 2nd Division. She was a whirlwind of deadly grace, her Shikai, Suzumaki, already active on her middle finger. She appeared behind a massive, brute force echo, tapped it once on the shoulder, then appeared 100 feet away and tapped it again. A black butterfly crest, the symbol of Homunka, bloomed on the creature's body, and it imploded. The herald was simply there, appearing in front of her as she landed. Shinigami, it spoke, its voice a chorus of 1,000 dying whispers. Your order is an illusion. Your death will be a lesson. Sui Feng, never one for words, attacked. She moved with a speed that was almost impossible to track, aiming to plant the first strike of her 2-hit kill technique. But as her stinger-clad finger approached the herald's chest, the air around it seemed to unravel. Her shunpo faltered, her speed stolen, her shikai hissed, the reishi that formed it actively decaying. The herald's hand shot out, grabbing her by the throat. It lifted her into the air, her small frame struggling against its unbreakable grip. Your power is built on the laws of this world, the herald whispered. We are the end of all laws. It squeezed. A sickening crack echoed across the battlefield. The herald tossed her aside like a broken doll, her body crashing into the side of a building and slumping to the ground, motionless. The sight sent a shockwave through the Gote 13. A captain had been defeated. Effortlessly. Sui Feng. Yoruichi screamed, her composure finally breaking as she saw her former student fall. Kūkaku saw the herald turn its attention to the breach in the lines Sui Feng had left. It was heading for the Central 46 compound, the heart of the Seraite's government. Oh no you don't, you faceless bastard. She roared. She launched herself at it, unleashing a full-power Soren Sokatsui. The twin blast of blue fire, enough to level a city block, washed over the herald. It barely slowed. The creature walked out of the inferno, its shadowy form completely unharmed. Its ability was not a shield. It was a passive field of negation that unmade energy directed at it. It appeared before her, its eyeless mask tilting with something that might have been curiosity. The defiant one, your spark is bright, it will be a pleasure to extinguish it. It raised its hand, its fingertips coalescing into 5 long, black claws of pure, corrosive energy. From across the battlefield, Naruto saw it. The world narrowed. The roar of battle, the screams, the explosions, it all faded into a dull hum. There was only Kūkaku, defiant and proud, facing an enemy she could not beat. And the clawed hand descending to end her. Time slowed to a crawl. He saw the flicker of fear in her eyes, quickly masked by her unbreakable pride. He saw her brace for the impact. He saw the inning of a smile on the herald's featureless face. A roar, primal and filled with a rage that shook the foundations of the world, erupted from Naruto's throat. It was not a human sound. The golden oak of the 9 tails erupted around him, but it didn't stop there. The chakra solidified, grew, expanded at an exponential rate. Bones of golden light formed a skeletal frame, then muscles of churning red-orange energy. Then a skin of brilliant, translucent gold. In seconds, a colossal avatar of a 9-tailed fox, hundreds of meters tall, towered over the Seraite, its sheer presence dwarfing the Manos from the Rukongai. The captains below, who had been fighting for their lives, stopped and stared up in pure, unadulterated terror and awe. The Kurama avatar's massive, clawed hand, larger than a house, swept across the battlefield. It didn't strike the herald. It moved with impossible delicacy, its giant fingers gently closing around Kūkaku, lifting her out of harm's way just as the herald's claws sliced through the air where she had been standing. The avatar placed her gently on a distant, undamaged rooftop before turning its full, burning attention to the herald. The herald, for the first time, showed a flicker of something other than contempt. It looked up at the mountain of living, divine energy and recognized a power that was not part of its master's equations. Impossible, the herald whispered. The avatar drew back its fist. This, a voice that was both Naruto's and the demon fox's boomed across the sky, as for hurting her. The punch was not fast. It was inevitable. The herald raised its hands, its negation field flaring to its maximum. But it was like trying to stop a tsunami with a piece of paper. The golden fist crashed down. The negation field shattered. The herald, its shadowy form, its porcelain mask, its very existence, was obliterated in a silent, cataclysmic explosion of pure, life-affirming chakra. With its commander gone, the hive mind of the echoes broke. They faltered, their movements becoming random and panicked. This was the opening the Gote 13 needed. With renewed fury, they pressed their advantage, cutting down the disorganized remnants of the invading army. High above, the golden avatar held its form for another moment, letting out one final, triumphant roar that sent the last of the echoes scattering back through the tear in the sky. Then, as the tear sealed itself, the avatar dissolved, its golden light receding back into the small human figure at its epicenter. Naruto landed on the rooftop next to Kūkaku. The Six Paths Sage Mode cloak flickered and died. He stumbled, catching himself on the ledge, his breath coming in ragged gasps. He swayed on his feet, and a thin trickle of bright red blood ran from his nose. Kūkaku was at his side in an instant, her hands supporting him. "Naruto, are you all right? What's wrong?" "I'm fine," he gasped, wiping the blood away with the back of his hand. But he wasn't. A sharp, piercing pain lanced through his chakra network. It felt like his own energy was fighting him, like his very soul was rejecting the world around it. Using the full avatar, channeling that much of his own world's power, had put an immense strain on his system. He had poured a gallon of gasoline into an engine designed for diesel. The resulting explosion had been spectacular, but the damage was internal. He looked up, meeting her worried gaze. He forced a smile, but it didn't reach his eyes. "See, told you I'd protect you." The battle was won. The Seraite was saved, but as Kūkaku held him, feeling the fine tremor running through his body, a cold dread settled in her heart. They had seen the divine. Now, they were beginning to understand the price. Chapter 8 End. Chapter 9. The Truth of the King. The Seraite was a city holding its breath. The ragged wound in the sky had closed, but the memory of it remained, a phantom scar on the collective consciousness. The ground was still blackened in great swaths where the echoes had fallen. The very reishi of the ancient city corroded by their touch. The 4th Division barracks were overflowing, the quiet, efficient movements of the healers a stark contrast to the groans of the wounded. Captain Sui Feng lay in a deep, keto-induced coma, her life hanging by a thread. The Gote 13 had won the battle, but the victory felt chillingly hollow. They had been tested, and for a horrifying moment, they had been found wanting. Naruto sat on the edge of a cot in one of the 4th Division's private rooms, the scent of antiseptic herbs thick in the air. Toin Unohana had just finished her examination, her serene smile never wavering, but her eyes held a depth of concern that was far more telling. "Your spiritual body is a paradox, Uzumaki-san," she said, her voice as calm as a placid lake. Her lieutenant, Azane Katetsu, stood behind her, looking utterly bewildered. "Your energy pathways are not the Hakusui and Sakatsu of a Shinigami. They are a network of channels far more complex and vibrant. They carry an energy that is undeniably alive. Chakra," Naruto supplied, his voice weary. The adrenaline had long since faded, leaving behind a bone-deep exhaustion and a persistent, sharp thrumming beneath his skin, like a discordant harmony. "Indeed," Unohana continued, "the problem is that this chakra and the reishi of our world are fundamentally incompatible. When you draw upon small amounts, your body is able to act as a transformer, converting what you need. But when you unleashed that colossal avatar, you did not convert. You simply opened the floodgates. You created a pocket of your world's reality inside ours." She leaned forward, her intensity palpable. "The result was a violent rejection. Your own energy pathways have been seared by the friction. Your body is trying to heal, but it is like trying to regrow a forest with poisoned water. Every time you use a significant amount of your power now, you are not just exhausting yourself. You are fundamentally damaging the vessel that contains it." The diagnosis was a death sentence delivered with a placid smile. He had a weapon that could save this world, but every time he fired it, the barrel warped a little more. Eventually, it would break. "So, what you're saying is," Kūkaku said, her arms crossed as she leaned in the doorway, her voice sharp with worry. He's a living bomb with a faulty fuse. Apt, if crude, Shiba dono, Hana said without turning. Rest is the only remedy I can prescribe. But I cannot say if it will be enough to heal the damage, or merely delay the inevitable. After Hana left, Kūkaku walked over and sat beside him on the cot. The silence was thick with unspoken fears. He had felt invincible for so long, a being of near limitless power. Now, for the first time, he had found his limit. And it wasn't an enemy he could punch, it was the very air he was breathing. "Don't you dare," she said suddenly, her voice low and fierce. He looked at her, confused. "Don't what? Don't you dare regret it," she clarified, her sharp eyes boring into his. "Don't you sit here feeling sorry for yourself because you got hurt saving my reckless ass. You did what you had to do. We're alive, that's the only thing that matters." He looked at the fire in her eyes, the unwavering strength that had drawn him to her from the moment he'd first seen her. A slow, tired smile touched his lips. "Wouldn't dream of it," he said. He took her hand, lacing his fingers with hers. Her grip was a firm, grounding pressure, an anchor in the storm of his own failing biology. In the 12th Division's sprawling, sterile laboratories, a very different kind of battle was being waged. It was a war of intellect, fueled by caffeine and a mutual, grudging respect. "Incompetent simpleton," Mayuri Kuratsuchi shrieked, his fingers flying across a holographic console. "Your methodology is archaic. You were filtering the residual energy through a keto-based matrix. You were contaminating the sample with the very properties you are trying to isolate." "And you, Mayuri," Kazuki Urahara replied cheerfully from the adjacent console, not looking up from his work, trying to analyze an entirely new form of energy using a framework that hasn't been updated since the original Gote 13 was founded. It's like trying to perform surgery with a battle axe. Effective for certain tasks, perhaps, but lacking in all subtlety. They were analyzing the black dust left by the defeated echoes and the faint energy signature from the Herald's point of annihilation. To everyone else, it was simply gone. To them, it was a symphony of data. The Herald's negation field was not a negation at all, Urahara mused, pushing his hat back. It didn't erase energy. It unwove it. He deconstructed Reishi back into its most fundamental, pre-existent state. A state of true, absolute void. A state that should not be able to exist in a stable form, Mayuri countered, a manic gleam in his eye. And yet it did. And the origin point of this anti-Reishi, the readings are faint, but they aren't from Hueco Mundo. They aren't from the Dongai. They're from here, deep, frighteningly deep. Urahara's fan snapped shut. The nests of maggots. Lower, Mayuri hissed. The central great underground prison. Lower still. Urahara's cheerful demeanor was gone, replaced by a chilling seriousness. I cross-referenced the energy signature with the dimensional tremors I've been tracking. They all lead back to a single, theoretical coordinate point. The one place no one is ever supposed to go. The foundation upon which the Seraite was built. He brought up a new screen, a complex, three-dimensional map of the Soul Society. A single red dot pulsed at its absolute nadir. The mausoleum of the old king. That's when the doors to the lab slid open. Captain Commander Yamamoto stood there, flanked by Shunsui and Byakuya. The old man's eyes were like embers. He had heard the name. He records of the mausoleum were sealed by my own hand 2 millennia ago, Yamamoto's voice rumbled. What have you found? The meeting was held in the Captain Commander's private chambers. Only a select few were present. Yamamoto, Shunsui, Yukitake, Byakuya, Hana, Urahara, and Mayuri. Naruto and Kūkaku were there as well, their presence a necessity that overrode all protocol. Urahara stood before a projection, laying out their horrifying discovery. The entity known as Azrael, he began, is not merely a primordial demon. According to the few fragmented texts we could unseal from the Tsunayashiro clan's forbidden library, Azrael was a being on par with the Soul King himself. Two sides of a coin. The Soul King represented creation, order, and stasis. Azrael represented the void, entropy, and change. He changed the image to a stylized, ancient drawing of a massive, shadowy figure being bound by 5 smaller, glowing figures. The founders of the 5 great noble families, the Kuchiki, Shihoin, Shiba, and Tsunayashiro clans, led by the first Yamamoto, did not defeat Azrael. They couldn't. Instead, they performed the original sin. They used the Soul King's power to vivisect Azrael, separating its power from its consciousness. They then used Azrael's power of the void to carve out the dimensions, Soul Society, the world of the living, Hueco Mundo. They created the cycle of souls. And they imprisoned the Soul King at the nexus of it all, turning him from a god into a battery, a linchpin to hold their creation together. The room was silent, the weight of the revelation crushing. Their entire existence was a lie, built upon a foundation of sacrilege and powered by two imprisoned, warring deities. The Soul King's palace is not a palace, Urahara continued grimly. It is the master lock. And the Seraite is the cage. Azrael's consciousness has been sealed beneath us all this time, sleeping. But the linchpin, the Soul King, has grown weak over the millennia. The seals are failing, and Naruto-san's arrival, a burst of pure, unadulterated life energy from outside the system, was the jolt of lightning that finally woke the prisoner up. Then the solution is to reinforce the seals, Byakuya stated, his voice rigid, trying to impose order on a concept that shattered his entire worldview. That's where the problem gets worse, Urahara said, his gaze hardening. The attack was not random. The Herald was a probe. The echoes were a distraction. Its movements, its targets, it was all too precise. Someone on our side gave them the information. Someone has been deliberately weakening the seals from within. He brought up a final piece of data. Records of minute, almost undetectable energy transfers from a single location in the Seraite to the prison's location, dating back centuries. The energy signature, Urahara said, his voice dropping to a near whisper, is a unique Kido frequency. One that belongs exclusively to the head of the Tsunayashiro clan. Betrayal. The word hung in the air, colder and more terrifying than any external threat. One of the 5 great noble families, the very architects of their world, was working to undo it. Tokunada Tsunayashiro, Yamamoto growled, the name tasting like ash. His family has always coveted power, believing they were the rightful heirs to the Soul King's will. They don't want to free Azrael, Naruto pieced it together, his mind racing despite his fatigue. They want to control it, to use its power to purge the worlds and rebuild them as they see fit. The situation was impossible. Their enemy wasn't just a monster in a cage. It was one of their own, holding the keys. A direct assault on the Tsunayashiro estate would trigger a civil war among the nobles, a distraction they couldn't afford. Attacking the prison was suicide. They were checkmated. No, Shunsui said, breaking the despairing silence. He looked up, his lazy demeanor gone, replaced by the sharp, calculating gaze of a strategist. There is one move left on the board. We can't get to the prison. But we can get to the lock. All eyes turned to him. The royal realm, Shunsui said. The Zero Division is sworn to protect the Soul King. But their true purpose is to be the final guardians of the Master Seal. If the Tsunayashiro clan is trying to seize control of the prison, they will have to neutralize the lock first. We have to get to the Soul King's palace, expose Tokunada to the royal guard, and secure the king before he does. It was a desperate, insane plan. A covert, unauthorized infiltration into the most sacred, heavily guarded place in all of existence. The royal guard will never allow it, Byakuya stated. They answer only to the king. The Shiba clan built the cannon that allows one to breach the barrier, Kūkaku said suddenly, her voice ringing with newfound purpose. The disgrace of her family could be their salvation. And my uncle, Isshin Shiba, was a member of the royal guard. They may listen to a Shiba. The pieces began to click into place. It was a long shot, a 1 in a million gamble, but it was the only path forward. A small team, Yamamoto decided, his voice resonating with finality. Covert. Fast. Your objective is not to fight. It is to reach the royal guard and expose the truth. He looked around the room, his gaze settling on each of them. Hiraku, Yukitaki, your experience is invaluable. Kuchiki, your standing among the nobles may be necessary. Urahara, your intellect is our sharpest weapon. Shihoin, he said, nodding to a shadow in the corner where Yoruichi had appeared in her human form. Your stealth is our only shield. Kūkaku Shiba, you are our way in. His ancient eyes finally rested on Naruto. And you, Naruto Uzumaki, Azrael wants you. Your presence in the royal realm may be the one thing that can stabilize the weakening king, or it may be the final key that breaks the lock. You are the greatest risk, and our greatest hope. He did not ask if Naruto would go. He did not need to. We leave at once, Shunsui said, taking command. Before Tokunada realizes we're onto him, Naruto stood, Kūkaku at his side. The thrumming pain under his skin was a constant reminder of his new mortality. But as he looked at the faces of the desperate, powerful people in the room, captains, exiles, nobles, and geniuses, all united by a single, impossible goal, he felt a familiar fire ignite in his chest. He was weakened, he was damaged, but he was not alone. And the fate of a world was once again resting on his shoulders. Chapter 9 End.